Runtime 7 to 8 minutes. The sun rises over the Dordogne Valley in what will one day be called France. It's the morning of a day that will never make it into any history book. Yet it marks the beginning of the end for an entire species. The year is approximately 40,000 BC, and the world is about to witness its first systematic genocide. One that won't be recognized as such for another 42,000 years. Picture this valley as it was then. Morning mist clings to the river, creating ghostly ribbons that wind between limestone cliffs. The temperature hovers just above freezing. Ice still grips the higher elevations, but here in the valley, life persists. A family of Neanderthals, 7 individuals, stirs in their rock shelter. They've occupied this site for 3 generations. Their grandparents' grandparents died here. Their children were born here. In 12 hours, none of them will be alive. But they don't know this yet. The eldest male, we'll call him the patriarch, though he has no name we could pronounce, emerges first. He's approximately 45 years old, which makes him ancient by Neanderthal standards. His body tells the story of a hard life, a left arm that never healed properly after a cave bear attack, a pronounced limp from a hunting accident, scars that crisscross his massive chest and shoulders. His brow ridge casts deep shadows over eyes that have seen countless winters, countless hunts, countless births and deaths. He doesn't speak in words as we understand them. Neanderthal language, if we can call it that, operates on a different frequency, more guttural, more musical, more dependent on gesture and context than abstract syntax. But he communicates. He grunts to his mate, a shorter female with graying red hair, and a face that would strike us as disturbingly human and utterly alien all at once. She's nursing their youngest, a child of perhaps 2 years, still dependent on her milk despite having a full set of teeth that could tear meat from bone. The family's routine begins as it has every morning for years. The adolescent males, 2 brothers aged roughly 14 and 16, prepare to scout for game. The pregnant female, heavy with her second child, works to rekindle the fire that's been banking all night. Fire is precious. It's kept alive continuously, passed from generation to generation, because creating it from scratch is difficult and time-consuming. This particular flame has burned for 7 years without going out. In 7 hours and 43 minutes, it will be extinguished forever. They don't see the scouts watching from the ridge above. They can't know that their valley has been marked for cleansing. They have no concept that they're about to become footnotes in a story of conquest that will span continents and millennia. They're simply trying to survive another day in a world that's growing colder, where prey is becoming scarcer, where the great herds they depend on are moving to new grazing grounds. But let's pause here. Let's zoom out from this single family and understand what's really happening in this moment. This isn't just a random act of violence we're about to witness. This is the culmination of a process that's been building for thousands of years, a wave of expansion, competition, and systematic elimination that will reshape the planet. Homo sapiens, our direct ancestors, arrived in Europe roughly 5,000 years before this morning. That's not a long time in evolutionary terms. It's barely a heartbeat. But in those 5 millennia, something unprecedented has been occurring. Everywhere sapiens go, Neanderthal populations collapse. Not slowly, not through peaceful assimilation or gentle competition for resources. They collapse with a speed and thoroughness that suggests something far more deliberate. The archaeological evidence is damning, though it took us decades to read it correctly. Neanderthal sites that had been continuously occupied for tens of thousands of years suddenly go silent within decades of sapiens' arrival. Kill sites show evidence of sophisticated ambushes that are uncharacteristic of Neanderthal hunting patterns, but perfectly aligned with sapiens' tactics. Mass graves contain Neanderthal remains showing perimortem trauma, injuries inflicted at or near the time of death, that cluster in patterns consistent with organized violence rather than individual conflicts. But here's what makes this morning in the Dordogne Valley so crucial. We're going to witness the mechanism. Not the broad statistical sweep of population replacement, but the actual boots-on-the-ground reality of how one human species eliminates another. The scouts on the ridge, there are 12 of them, are all sapiens. They've been tracking this Neanderthal family for 3 days, learning their patterns, identifying their weaknesses, planning their approach. These aren't random wanderers who stumbled upon competitors. These are specialists. This is what they do. They're the leading edge of an expansion that won't stop until it reaches the Pacific Ocean, until it crosses the Bering Land Bridge, until it encompasses every habitable corner of the planet. Their leader is a man we might recognize if we cleaned him up and put him in modern clothes. He's tall for his era, roughly 5 feet 9 inches, with a gracile build that looks almost fragile compared to the Neanderthals below. But appearances deceive. This man has killed before, many times. He carries a spear with a revolutionary weapon technology, an atlatl, a spear thrower that effectively doubles his range and quadruples the force of his throw. The Neanderthals have nothing like this. Their weapon technology hasn't changed significantly in 50,000 years. But it's not just weapons that give sapiens the advantage. It's organization. It's communication. It's the ability to coordinate complex actions across time and space in ways that Neanderthals simply cannot match. The scouts use a sophisticated sign language to communicate silently. They've designated roles, flankers, drivers, killers, lookouts. They've planned for contingencies. If the Neanderthals flee upriver, 3 sapiens are positioned to intercept. If they flee downriver, 4 more wait in ambush. If they retreat to their shelter, fire will flush them out. This is warfare, systematic, organized, genocidal in intent, if not in name. The Neanderthal patriarch senses something. He can't articulate what, perhaps a scent on the wind, perhaps a subtle wrongness in the morning birdsong, perhaps an instinct honed by millennia of predator awareness. He grunts sharply, and his family freezes. The adolescent males stop their preparation. The pregnant female pauses in her fire tending. Even the nursing infant goes still, sensing the tension. For 37 heartbeats, nothing moves. The valley holds its breath. Mist continues to rise from the river, indifferent to the drama unfolding. Somewhere distant, a mammoth calls, a sound that will be extinct in another 10,000 years, joining these Neanderthals in oblivion. Then the patriarch relaxes. False alarm. He's survived this long by being cautious, but he can't remain on high alert forever. The family returns to their morning routine. The adolescents resume their preparations. The fire begins to catch, orange flames licking at fresh kindling. Life continues. High on the ridge, the sapiens' leader makes a gesture. It's time. The ambush won't begin for another 47 minutes. the sapiens are patient. They'll wait until the adolescent males leave on their scouting mission, splitting the family's strength. They'll wait until the morning sun is high enough to shine directly into the rock shelter, blinding anyone looking outward. They'll wait until they have every advantage that patience and planning can provide. Because this isn't about a fair fight. This was never about a fair fight. This is about elimination. This is about taking territory and resources and leaving no rivals who might return. This is about creating a future where only one human species walks the earth. The Neanderthal infant, the youngest member of the family, will be the first to die. Not because the sapiens are particularly cruel, but because in the chaos of the initial assault, a thrown spear will catch the nursing mother in the throat, and she'll fall forward onto her child, smothering it even as she drowns in her own blood. The patriarch will last the longest, fighting with desperate strength even after taking multiple wounds. He'll kill one sapiens and badly wound another before he's brought down by sheer numbers. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. For now, as the sun continues its rise and the mist begins to burn away, the Neanderthal family simply lives. The pregnant female succeeds in coaxing the fire to full life. The adolescent males arm themselves with thrusting spears, short, heavy weapons designed for close combat with megafauna, utterly inadequate for what's coming. The patriarch examines a scraper he's been working on, a beautiful piece of craftsmanship that shows the sophisticated cognitive abilities Neanderthals possessed. They make art. They bury their dead. They care for their injured and elderly. The patriarch's survival to such an advanced age with his disabilities proves that. They have culture, tradition, knowledge passed down through generations. In every meaningful sense, they are people. And in less than half a day, they will be corpses. The sapiens on the ridge check their weapons one final time. Spears, atlatls, stone blades, fire-hardened wooden stakes. They've done this before. They'll do it again. Across Europe, across Asia, anywhere Neanderthals still survive, this scene is playing out in countless variations. A pressure, a push, a systematic elimination dressed up as competition for resources. 23 minutes until first contact. The adolescent Neanderthal males are almost ready to depart. Once they're out of the valley, the odds shift dramatically. 7 targets become 5. The strongest warriors removed from the equation. The sapiens have planned well. But here's the question that should haunt us as we watch this unfold. Are we watching murder, or are we watching evolution in action? Are these sapiens committing genocide, or are they simply doing what every successful species does, expanding into available ecological niches and outcompeting rivals? Is there a moral dimension to what's about to happen? Or is morality itself a luxury invented by the victors? The Neanderthals never asked these questions. They couldn't. Their cognitive architecture, while sophisticated, didn't bend toward abstract ethical reasoning in the way sapiens did. They lived in the immediate, in the concrete, in the present moment. Perhaps that's why they're about to die. Perhaps abstract thinking, the ability to plan, to coordinate, to imagine scenarios that haven't happened yet, is the ultimate survival trait. Or perhaps they're about to die simply because they had the misfortune to evolve on the same planet as us. 18 minutes now. The pregnant Neanderthal female feels her child kick inside her. she'll never give birth. The fetus, a male, as examination of the remains 42,000 years in the future will reveal, will die with her. Another genetic line terminated before it can propagate. Another set of unique genes, shaped by hundreds of thousands of years of evolution, wiped from existence in a single morning of violence. The patriarch shares meat with his mate, a gesture of affection that transcends species. They grunt to each other in tones that suggest contentment, partnership, bonds that we would recognize as love if we heard them. In 15 minutes, he'll watch her die. In 18 minutes, he'll follow. The sun climbs higher. The valley warms slightly. Ice begins to melt at the edges of the river, creating sounds like breaking glass. Beautiful, peaceful, completely indifferent to the tragedy about to unfold. 10 minutes. The adolescent males leave the shelter, moving with the confident grace of young predators. They're laughing. We think they're laughing, based on the vocalizations Neanderthals make in moments of ease. They have no idea they'll be dead before they return. They have no idea that 3 sapiens are already moving to intercept them, to ensure they never make it back to warn their family. 7 minutes. The remaining Neanderthals, patriarch, his mate, the pregnant female, the nursing mother, the infant still at her breast, and one elderly female who hasn't emerged from the shelter yet, represent a typical extended family unit. This is how Neanderthals lived. Small, tight-knit groups bound by blood and shared experience. It made them strong against predators. It makes them vulnerable to coordinated assault. 4 minutes. The sapiens begin their descent from the ridge. They move in practiced silence, weapons ready, every sense alert. This is the moment they've been trained for, planned for, lived for. They're about to secure territory. They're about to remove competition. They're about to make the world a little safer for their own children. They're about to commit what we, 42,000 years later, will struggle to call anything but murder. 2 minutes. The patriarch's unease returns. Stronger now. Undeniable. He stands abruptly, scanning the tree line, the ridges, the approaches to their shelter. His mate notices, rises to stand beside him. The pregnant female stops her work. Even the nursing mother shifts, moving the infant to a more protected position against her body. They sense it now. Danger. Close. Imminent. But Neanderthals have slow reaction times compared to sapiens. Their decision-making process, while sophisticated, runs on older, more deliberate neural pathways. By the time the patriarch decides to call his sons back, to retreat into the shelter, to prepare for defense, 1 minute. The first spear flies. The killing ground. Runtime, 8 to 9 minutes. The spear catches morning sunlight as it arcs through the air, a moment of terrible beauty frozen in time. Obsidian point, fire-hardened shaft, eagle feathers for stabilization. Technology refined over thousands of kills, thousands of hunts, thousands of moments exactly like this one. The Neanderthal patriarch sees it coming. His eyes track its trajectory with the practiced precision of a lifetime avoiding danger. But seeing and avoiding are different things. His body is powerful, muscle built on muscle, a physique that could wrestle young mammoths to the ground. But it's also heavy. Dense bones, thick muscle tissue, a body plan optimized for strength over speed. He tries to move, tries to push his mate behind him, tries to do something, anything, to change what's about to happen. The spear takes him high in the left shoulder. Not a killing blow, not even close. The obsidian point punches through muscle and lodges against his scapula, and he roars, a sound of pain and rage that echoes off the valley walls. His mate screams. The pregnant female bolts for the shelter. The nursing mother freezes, clutching her infant, her mind unable to process what's happening fast enough to choose flight or fight. That freeze costs her everything. 3 more spears are already in the air. The sapiens have timed their throws with practiced precision, each man releasing a heartbeat after the one before him, creating a continuous rain of projectiles that gives the targets no time to react, no space to dodge. This is the mathematics of slaughter. Calculated, optimized, refined through repetition. The second spear misses the patriarch entirely, sailing past his head to clatter against the rock shelter wall. But the third catches the nursing mother in the throat, exactly as we described earlier, and she goes down hard, forward momentum carrying her onto the infant she's been holding. The child makes a sound, not quite a scream, more like a cough of surprise. And then there's only the wet gurgling of the mother trying to breathe through a severed windpipe, her body weight crushing the life from her baby, even as her own life drains into the dirt. 4 seconds have elapsed since the first spear flew. The pregnant female makes it to the shelter entrance. She's fast, despite her burden, terror lending speed to her heavy frame. But the elderly female is emerging at the same moment, drawn by the commotion, and they collide in the narrow opening. For 3 precious seconds, they're tangled together, grandmother and granddaughter, both trying to move in opposite directions, both panicking, both about to die. The fourth spear, the one that missed the patriarch, wasn't a miss at all. The thrower was aiming for the shelter entrance, anticipating exactly this kind of retreat. It catches the elderly female in the back, punching through her ribcage and into her lung. She gasps, blood spraying from her mouth, and collapses backward, taking the pregnant female down with her. 7 seconds. The patriarch pulls the spear from his shoulder with his right hand, a feat of pain tolerance that would drop most sapiens into shock. Blood flows freely from the wound, but Neanderthals heal faster than we do. Their bodies adapted to constant trauma, constant injury, constant physical punishment. He'll survive this wound. He survived worse. But survival requires time, and time is the one resource he no longer has. He charges. Not toward the attackers. He still can't see them clearly in the tree line, but toward his mate, trying to push her toward safety, trying to get between her and whatever is coming. His tactical instincts are sound. His execution is perfect. But he's fighting 21st century guerrilla tactics with Stone Age responses, and the mismatch is fatal. The sapiens have spread out during their approach, creating a semicircle of death that surrounds 3 sides of the kill zone. When the patriarch charges in one direction, he's exposing his flank to attackers he doesn't know are there. When he tries to protect his mate by pushing her behind him, he's moving her directly into another line of fire. The 5th, 6th, and 7th spears fly almost simultaneously. 10 seconds. One takes the patriarch in the right thigh, hamstringing him, bringing him to his knees. The second catches his mate in the abdomen, a gut wound, slow and agonizing, almost certainly fatal, but not immediately so. She screams again, this time in a register that sounds heartbreakingly human, a sound of betrayal and incomprehension, as if she's asking the universe how this could possibly be happening. The third spear misses entirely, sailing over the pregnant female, who's still struggling to free herself from beneath her grandmother's dying body. 12 seconds since the first spear. 5 Neanderthals down, 2 definitely dead, the nursing mother and her infant. 3 wounded, the patriarch, his mate, the elderly female. None of the attackers visible yet. This is the genius of the atlatl, the revolutionary nature of projectile warfare. You can kill from a distance. You can strike before your enemy knows you're there. You can win battles before they truly begin. The sapiens emerge from the tree line now, moving fast, weapons ready for close combat. 9 of them. 3 stayed on the ridge to intercept the adolescent males who will, at this very moment, be dying in a separate ambush 200 yards upriver. 9 against 3 wounded and 1 terrified pregnant female who just managed to push her grandmother's corpse aside and is crawling deeper into the shelter on hands and knees. The patriarch tries to stand. His hamstrung leg won't support him. He falls, rises to one knee, grabs a rock the size of his head with his good hand. His face is a mask of blood and rage, and something else. Understanding, perhaps. The knowledge that this is the end. The knowledge that he's failed to protect his family. The knowledge that everything his line has survived, ice ages, predators, starvation, disease, ends here, on this morning, at the hands of these strange, tall, gracile killers who move like ghosts and strike like lightning. He throws the rock. It's a good throw, even wounded, even one-handed. It catches the lead sapiens in the chest and sends him sprawling, ribs cracked, gasping for breath. First blood for the Neanderthals. Last blood, too, as it turns out. 15 seconds. The other 8 sapiens swarm the patriarch. This is the dangerous moment, the time when Neanderthal strength could turn the tide. In close combat, one-on-one, a healthy Neanderthal beats a sapiens almost every time. Their strength is phenomenal. Their pain tolerance is off the charts. Their skulls are thick enough to turn glancing blows that would kill us. But the patriarch isn't healthy. He's wounded in the shoulder and leg, bleeding heavily, operating on adrenaline and desperation. And he's not fighting one-on-one. He's fighting 8-on-1, and the 8 are using tactics that specifically counter Neanderthal advantages. They stay at range. They use their longer spears as pikes, jabbing and retreating, never committing to the kind of grappling combat where Neanderthal strength dominates. They circle, forcing him to turn constantly, preventing him from focusing on any single opponent. And they're patient. They're wearing him down, bleeding him out, waiting for the inevitable moment when blood loss and exhaustion make him vulnerable. It takes 23 seconds. 23 seconds of the patriarch swinging his rock, catching one sapiens in the arm hard enough to break bone, grabbing another's spear and yanking him close enough to headbutt, a devastating strike that crushes the sapien's nose and sends him reeling backward, blinded by blood and pain. But there are always more. Always another spear jabbing at his ribs, his back, his legs. Always another cut, another wound, another drain on his fading strength. 38 seconds since the first spear flew. The patriarch goes down for the last time, not from any single wound, but from the accumulation of dozens. He's been stabbed 17 times. He's lost approximately 2 liters of blood. His body simply stops obeying his commands. He collapses face first into the dirt, still conscious, still trying to rise, still fighting with everything he has. A sapien steps forward, not the leader, but a younger male, eager to prove himself. He carries a stone axe, a beautiful piece of work with a handle wrapped in sinew and a blade napped from green flint. He raises it above his head in a 2-handed grip. The patriarch sees it coming. His eyes, brown, we think, or maybe hazel, genetic analysis suggests Neanderthals had a wider range of eye colors than we initially believed, track the axe's descent with perfect clarity. Does he understand what's happening? Does he have time for any final thought, any last moment of consciousness where he experiences something we might recognize as the knowledge of impending death? We'll never know. The axe comes down. 41 seconds. The patriarch's mate has been trying to crawl away, her hands pressed against the gut wound that's spilling her intestines onto the ground. She's made it perhaps 8 feet from where she was hit. Not far. Not nearly far enough. 2 sapiens reach her, and there's a moment, just a moment, where something like hesitation crosses their faces. She's not fighting. She's not a threat. She's clearly dying anyway. The gut wound has already sealed her fate. It's just a question of whether she bleeds out in the next few minutes or dies of sepsis over the next few days. Mercy would be ending it quickly. Cruelty would be leaving her to suffer. The sapiens choose mercy. One clean thrust to the heart. Professional. Almost kind in its way. 46 seconds. Inside the shelter, the pregnant female and the elderly grandmother are still alive. The grandmother is fading fast. The spear that punctured her lung has filled her chest cavity with blood, and she's drowning from the inside, her lips turning blue, her breathing becoming progressively more labored. But she's conscious. She can hear the sounds of her family dying outside. She can hear her granddaughter's panicked breathing in the darkness beside her. The pregnant female has wedged herself into a crack at the back of the shelter, a natural chimney in the limestone that rises 20 feet and exits somewhere on the cliff face above. It's tight, too tight for a pregnant Neanderthal female to climb, especially in darkness, especially in panic. But she's trying anyway, scraping skin off her arms and belly, pulling herself upward inch by desperate inch. 3 sapiens enter the shelter. They have to duck to fit through the entrance. It's sized for Neanderthals, who are shorter on average. Inside, the fire still burns. The family's possessions are scattered around. Sleeping furs, stone tools in various stages of completion, a cache of dried meat hanging from a rock outcropping, evidence of lives lived, of routines and rituals and the everyday business of survival. The sapiens barely glance at any of it. 1 minute, 3 seconds. They find the elderly female first. She's propped against the shelter wall, blood frothing at her lips, eyes glazed but still tracking movement. A sapiens kneels beside her, almost gentle, and drives his blade into the base of her skull. Instant death, the kindest end she could have hoped for under the circumstances. The pregnant female hears this. She's only 12 feet away, hidden in shadow, breathing in short, panicked gasps that echo in the narrow chimney. She tries to go quiet, tries to control her breathing, tries to become invisible. But Neanderthals aren't built for silence. Their respiratory systems are optimized for cold weather, for efficiently warming frigid air before it reaches their lungs. This means larger nasal passages, more turbulent airflow, more noise with every breath. The sapiens hear her. 1 minute, 18 seconds. They approach the chimney carefully. They can't see her in the darkness, can't tell if she's armed or preparing an ambush. One produces a torch, a bundle of dried grass and resinous wood that he lights from the family fire. Ironic, using their own flame to hunt them down. He extends the torch into the chimney, and the light reveals her, pressed into a crevice 15 feet up, belly swollen with pregnancy, face streaked with tears and dirt and blood. She makes a sound. Not words. Neanderthals probably didn't have words in the way we understand them. But it's clearly a plea a begging, a desperate attempt to communicate that she's not a threat, that she's carrying new life, that surely there's some common humanity that transcends species. The sapiens look at each other. A decision is being made. We'll never know the details of their discussion, whether they debated at all, whether some argued for mercy, whether the decision was unanimous or contested. But the result is what matters. They can't reach her with their spears. The angle is wrong, the chimney too narrow. So they do something that shows both their intelligence and their ruthlessness. They build up the fire. They add green wood to make smoke. They seal the chimney entrance with their bodies and wait. It takes 7 minutes for her to suffocate. 7 minutes of increasingly desperate coughing, of trying to climb higher, of eventually losing consciousness and sliding back down to where the sapiens can reach her with their blades. When they pull her body from the chimney, she's still warm. The fetus inside her is still alive, its heart beating for another 3 or 4 minutes before oxygen deprivation stops it forever. 8 minutes, 12 seconds since the first spear. Outside, the cleanup has begun. The sapiens are efficient. They've done this before. Bodies are dragged away from the shelter entrance. Usable tools and weapons are claimed. The meat cache is removed. Food is food, and these sapiens have families to feed, and any squeamishness about where it came from died long before this morning. The fire is scattered, the coals kicked apart. The 7-year-old flame that represented continuity and survival extinguished in seconds. The rock shelter that has been a home for 3 generations becomes just another cave. Empty, silent, waiting for new occupants who will never know what happened here. Upriver, the adolescent males are already dead. The ambush was quick, professional, anticlimactic. They never had a chance. 2 spears each, thrown from cover, followed by a swift advance to finish the wounded. Total time from first contact to last heartbeat, 41 seconds. They died not knowing their family was under attack. Perhaps that's a mercy. 12 minutes, 7 seconds since the first spear. The sapiens' leader, the tall male who planned this attack, who scouted the valley, who positioned his men with such deadly precision, surveys the killing ground. 9 corpses, 7 adults and adolescents, 1 child, 1 fetus. An entire genetic line terminated. An entire family erased from existence. Another small victory in the slow, grinding campaign to remove Neanderthals from Europe. He's satisfied. The operation went better than planned. Only 2 sapiens wounded, neither seriously. The broken ribs will heal. The crushed nose will set crooked, but functional. Small prices to pay for what they've gained. A sheltered valley with good water, proximity to game trails, defensible positions. His people will move in within the week. They'll raise their children here. They'll tell stories around their fires. Stories that might include today's battle, though probably not. It wasn't significant enough to merit retelling. Just another day's work. Just another obstacle removed. Does he think about the pregnant female? About the child crushed beneath its dying mother? About the patriarch's last stand against impossible odds? Probably not. That would require seeing the Neanderthals as people, as beings with inner lives that matter. And if he saw them that way, he couldn't do what he just did. Couldn't do what he'll do again, in other valleys, in other seasons, until the job is complete and Neanderthals exist only as bones in the ground, waiting for archaeologists who won't be born for 40,000 years. 14 minutes since the first spear. The sun continues to climb. The valley warms. Blood soaks into the earth, into the same soil where Neanderthal children played, where families gathered, where life happened in all its mundane complexity. In a few months, grass will grow here, thick and green, nourished by iron-rich soil. In a few years, the bloodstains will be invisible. In a few thousand years, even the bones will have mostly disintegrated, leaving only fragmentary remains that will confuse and intrigue future scientists. But right now, in this moment, the evidence is overwhelming. This was slaughter. This was systematic. This was genocide in its purest form. The intentional destruction of a group, not for any specific crime or threat they posed, but simply because they existed in space that another group wanted. The sapiens begin to leave. They'll return to their main camp with news of their success. They'll bring back women and children to occupy the valley. They'll expand their territory by another few square miles. Life will continue for them. Life will end for the Neanderthals who called this place home. 16 minutes. One sapiens remains behind. A scout tasked with ensuring no other Neanderthals are in the area, with keeping watch while the main group returns to camp. He settles into a position on the ridge where they launched their attack, where he has clear sight lines down the valley in both directions. He's young, perhaps 18 or 19 years old. This might be his first major operation. He performed well. He'll be praised. He'll gain status. He'll be more attractive to potential mates. Success in war breeding success in life. He doesn't spare a thought for the bodies below. Why would he? They're not his people. They're not even fully human in his worldview. Similar enough to be competitors, different enough to kill without moral complexity. It's the perfect psychological distance for genocide. Close enough to recognize as rivals, far enough to deny full personhood. 20 minutes. The valley grows quiet again. No movement except the river flowing, the wind rustling through trees. The normal business of nature reasserting itself after human violence. A raven lands near the nursing mother's corpse, cocks its head, examines this unexpected bounty. More will come. By nightfall, scavengers will have found the bodies. By the next morning, the real work of decomposition will have begun. But something else is beginning too. Something the sapiens can't see, can't measure, can't understand. With every Neanderthal family eliminated, with every valley cleared, with every territorial expansion, they're narrowing the genetic diversity of human species on Earth. They're creating a bottleneck. They're ensuring that the future of humanity will run through their genes, and their genes alone. Is this good or bad? Evolution doesn't make moral judgments. It simply rewards what works and eliminates what doesn't. And what works, in this case, is sapiens' ability to coordinate large-scale violence, to plan complex operations, to systematically destroy competitors. The very traits that make us capable of art, science, philosophy, and love are the same traits that make us capable of genocide. 25 minutes. The first flies arrive. They're drawn by blood, by the smell of ruptured organs, by the chemical signals of death. They land on open wounds, on staring eyes, on slack mouths. They begin the process of converting death into new life, breaking down complex proteins into simpler compounds that will feed maggots, that will feed birds, that will feed foxes, that will die, and feed the soil, that will feed plants, that will feed herbivores, that will feed carnivores, in the endless cycle of energy and matter moving through the biosphere. The Neanderthals are already being recycled, already becoming part of something else, already ceasing to be people and becoming resources. 30 minutes. High in the sky, clouds are forming. Weather is moving in. A storm front that will bring rain tonight, washing away the blood, diluting the scent of carnage, cleansing the killing ground. By tomorrow morning, you'd have to look closely to know anything unusual happened here. By next week, only the bones would remain as evidence. By next month, even those would be scattered by scavengers. The perfect crime. Murder on a species-wide scale. And nature itself conspires to erase the evidence. This is how it happened. Not once, but thousands of times. Not in one place, but across an entire continent. Not quickly, but over centuries and millennia. Each individual massacre like this one contributing to a larger pattern. Death by 1,000 cuts, played out across 40,000 years of human prehistory. The Neanderthals never stood a chance. The aftermath. Runtime 8 to 9 minutes. 3 hours after the first spear flew, the Sapiens war party returns to their base camp. It's located 7 miles to the east, sheltered in a box canyon that provides natural defense and access to a spring that never freezes. Approximately 60 individuals live here: men, women, children, elders. This is what anthropologists call a band society, the fundamental unit of hunter-gatherer social organization. But calling it merely a band understates its sophistication. This is a military colony. The leader, the tall male who planned and executed this morning's operation, enters the camp to celebration. Children run to greet the returning warriors. Women ululate in a manner that won't sound out of place in similar cultures 40,000 years in the future. The elders nod their approval, conferring status and recognition on men who've proven their worth through violence. This is important to understand. The sapiens don't see what they've done as murder. They see it as heroism, as providing for their community, as making the world safer for their children. And by their own cultural standards, they're absolutely correct. They've eliminated a potential threat, secured valuable territory, and demonstrated their prowess. These are the actions of successful men in a successful society. But let's look more carefully at this camp, because its very structure tells us something crucial about why sapiens are winning this war. The camp is organized, not haphazardly scattered like Neanderthal settlements tend to be, but deliberately structured with different areas for different functions. Sleeping shelters cluster in the most protected area nearest the cliff face. Food preparation happens in a central area where multiple fires burn. Communal cooking that builds social bonds and allows for more efficient use of resources. Tool-making occurs in a dedicated workshop area where the best light falls during the afternoon. Even waste disposal is organized, with a designated midden area downwind from the living spaces. This level of organization requires something Neanderthals struggle with: abstract spatial planning. The ability to imagine an optimal camp layout and then implement it. The ability to enforce rules about where people can and cannot place their fires, their sleeping areas, their refuse. The ability to maintain these organizational structures across generations, teaching children not just skills, but systems. The war party disperses to their families. The leader seeks out the camp's senior elder, a woman of approximately 55 years, ancient by the standards of this era, half-blind and missing most of her teeth, but still sharp-minded and politically crucial. She's the keeper of stories, the repository of generational knowledge, the person who legitimizes decisions through her approval. What follows is a debriefing. The leader describes the operation in detail: the scouting, the planning, the execution, the results. He's thorough. He mentions the 2 wounded sapiens, both of whom have already been treated by the camp's healer, a middle-aged woman with extensive knowledge of wound care, herbal medicines, and basic surgery. He describes the Neanderthal family's composition, their shelter, their possessions. The elder listens without interruption. When he finishes, she asks a single question. "The valley is ours?" "The valley is ours." She nods. This is what matters. Not the moral dimension of killing an entire family, but the practical outcome. Territory secured, resources claimed, threat eliminated. From her perspective, from the perspective of her entire culture, this is an unqualified success. But here's what makes this conversation so chilling. They have a word for what they're doing. We don't know what the word is. Their language is lost to us forever. But the concept exists in their communication. The systematic removal of Neanderthals from desirable territories. The coordinated expansion of sapiens populations into areas previously occupied by their cousins. This isn't opportunistic violence. This isn't random conflict. This is policy. This is strategy. This is something they've named and normalized and perfected over generations. 4 hours after the first spear. The 2 wounded sapiens are recovering in the healer's area. The male with broken ribs is in more pain. Rib injuries are excruciating and slow to heal. But his prognosis is good. The ribs will knit. The bruising will fade. In 6 to 8 weeks, he'll be fully operational again. The male with the crushed nose has already had the break set. Wooden splints bound across his face with sinew, packed with moss and herbs that will reduce swelling and prevent infection. He'll breathe through his mouth for the next few weeks, and his nose will never look the same. But he'll survive. Both are being treated as heroes. Children cluster around them, listening to their stories of the battle. Young males study them with open admiration, imagining themselves in similar situations. Young females assess them as potential mates. Success in war translating directly to reproductive advantage. This is sexual selection in action. The males who excel at organized violence are the ones who get to pass on their genes. The males who hesitate, who show mercy, who can't stomach the killing, they're the ones who end up with fewer mating opportunities, whose genetic lines slowly fade from the population. Over generations, this creates evolutionary pressure toward increasingly efficient killers. We are descended from the sapiens in this camp. Their DNA flows in our veins. Their capacity for organized violence is our inheritance. 5 hours after the first spear, a planning session begins. The camp's leadership, the war party leader, the senior elder, 2 other experienced males, and, interestingly, 3 women who've demonstrated exceptional organizational skills, gather to discuss next steps. They use a combination of spoken language, gesture, and physical modeling to work through complex scenarios. One woman uses sticks and stones to create a map of the territory, placing markers to represent known Neanderthal settlements, sapiens camps, water sources, game migration routes. The sophistication here is breathtaking. They're engaging in strategic planning that requires holding multiple variables in mind simultaneously, projecting outcomes weeks or months into the future, coordinating actions across distributed groups. This is the kind of abstract reasoning that Neanderthals can manage in simple situations, but struggle with as complexity increases. The decision: move a subset of families into the newly acquired valley within the next 5 days. Maintain a permanent armed presence. Continue scouting for additional Neanderthal groups in the region. Expand systematically, methodically, ensuring that each new territory is fully secured before moving to the next. This is colonization. This is Lebensraum. This is every expansionist policy that will be repeated throughout human history, here at its very beginning, already fully formed in concept and execution. One of the women asks a question that reveals just how normalized this process has become. How many valleys until we reach the mountains? The leader considers. 12, perhaps 15 if we take the river route. And how many are occupied? We've identified 7 Neanderthal groups, probably more we haven't found yet. A pause, mental calculation. Then, matter-of-factly, 3 seasons then, maybe 4 if winter comes early. They're discussing the elimination of 7 to 10 Neanderthal families, upwards of 70 individuals, the same way we might discuss a construction project or a harvest schedule. Clinical, practical, completely devoid of moral anguish. 6 hours after the first spear. Back at the Neanderthal Valley, scavengers have discovered the bodies. Ravens arrive first, but now there are foxes, wolves, even a young bear drawn by the smell of blood. They squabble over the corpses, each species taking what it can get. The nursing mother and her infant are already being dismembered, dragged apart, converted from people into calories. The sapiens scout on the ridge watches this with professional detachment. He's seen it before. Bodies are bodies. Once the life leaves them, they're just meat. He's more concerned with movement in the tree line, with potential threats, with doing his job of keeping watch while his people establish their claim to this territory. But something interesting is happening that he can't see, can't know about, won't be discovered until 42,000 years in the future, when archaeologists carefully excavate this site. The patriarch's final position, the place where he fell after his last stand, is creating what will be called a cultural layer in the stratigraphy. His blood has soaked into the soil, along with fragments of stone tools broken in the combat, bits of bone from the impacts, even fragments of the spears that killed him. All of this is settling into the earth, being covered by the natural processes of sediment deposition, being sealed into a time capsule that will preserve this moment of violence in remarkable detail. The bones themselves will tell stories. The cut marks from sapiens' weapons will be distinctive, longer, shallower, more regular than the marks left by animal teeth or Neanderthal tools. The pattern of trauma will reveal the choreography of the fight. The chemical composition of the soil will show elevated levels of phosphorus from blood and decomposition. Even pollen trapped in the layers will tell us what season this happened in, what plants were blooming, what the ecosystem looked like. But all of that is in the distant future. Right now, in this moment, it's just a killing ground being reclaimed by nature. 7 hours after the first spear. The sapiens camp is preparing for an evening meal. This is another crucial difference between the two species. Sapiens are better at delayed gratification and resource management. While Neanderthals tend to feast when food is abundant and suffer when it's not, sapiens have developed sophisticated storage technologies and social mechanisms for sharing that smooth out the boom and bust cycle. Tonight's meal includes meat taken from the Neanderthal cache, several days' worth of dried venison and ibex that represents hours of hunting and processing labor. The sapiens feel no guilt about this appropriation. Spoils of war, resources of the defeated transferred to the victors. This, too, is a pattern that will repeat throughout human history. Children play at the edges of the gathering, and if you watch them carefully, you'll see something disturbing. They're playing war, acting out the morning's battle, assigning roles. Some children pretending to be heroic sapiens warriors, others reluctantly playing the role of Neanderthals to be hunted down and symbolically killed. The game ends with celebration, with the warriors receiving praise and treats from watching adults. This is cultural transmission. This is how values are passed from generation to generation. These children are learning that killing Neanderthals is not just acceptable, but praiseworthy. They're internalizing the ideology that makes genocide possible. They're becoming the next wave of colonizers, and they're doing it through play. 8 hours after the first spear. The sun is setting. Golden light slants across the valley where the Neanderthal family died. The rock shelter that was their home stands empty, its entrance stained with dried blood that looks black in the fading light. The fire pit is cold, the 7-year-old flame extinguished, the continuity broken. In the silence, you can almost hear the absence, the voices that will never speak again, the children who will never be born, the future that was stolen. But the sapiens don't hear this. They're 7 miles away, celebrating their victory, planning their expansion, living their lives with the confidence of a species that's found its winning formula. They're singing around their fires, actual songs with rhythm and melody and words that convey abstract concepts and emotional states. Music is another thing they do better than Neanderthals. Another way they build social cohesion, transmit culture, create shared meaning. The songs tonight are about courage, about defending the tribe, about making the world safe for children. They're beautiful in their way. They would move you to tears if you heard them, if you understood the language, if you could forget for a moment what they're celebrating. This is the terrible truth about genocide. It's rarely perpetrated by monsters. It's carried out by ordinary people who love their families, who tell stories to their children, who create art and music, and all the things that make life worth living. The same cognitive and cultural capacities that allow for these beautiful human experiences also enable systematic violence on a massive scale. 9 hours after the first spear. In the Neanderthal Valley, the scavengers have eaten their fill and departed. What remains is scattered and torn, barely recognizable as having once been people. The pregnant female's body is half in, half out of the rock shelter, her belly torn open by foxes seeking the calorie-rich fetus. The patriarch is mostly intact. His size and toughness deterred some predators. But his eyes are gone, taken by ravens, and his face is already beginning to collapse as decomposition begins its work. By morning, there will be less. By next week, just bones and scattered possessions. By next month, even the bones will begin to break down under the assault of weather and scavengers and the simple chemistry of decay. But before that happens, something else will occur. The sapiens will return tomorrow to begin the occupation. They'll see the carnage, the scattered remains, the evidence of what they did. And they'll react not with horror, but with satisfaction. Threat neutralized, territory secured, mission accomplished. They'll clean up, but not out of respect for the dead. They'll clear away the bodies because rotting corpses attract predators and create disease risk. They'll do it for purely practical reasons, the same way you'd clear debris from a construction site. The Neanderthal remains will be unceremoniously dumped in a ravine half a mile away, left for the scavengers to finish. There will be no burial, no ritual, no acknowledgement that these were beings with inner lives, with loves and fears and hopes. The sapiens reserve those honors for their own dead. The Neanderthals get nothing. 10 hours after the first spear. The sapiens' camp is settling in for the night. Guards are posted. They always post guards. Another organizational advantage over Neanderthals, who tend to rely on dogs and their own senses. Fires are banked but kept alive. Children are put to bed with stories that will shape their understanding of the world, of their place in it, of who deserves to live and who deserves to die. The war party leader lies with his mate in their shelter. They have 3 children already, another on the way. His genetic line will be successful. In 40,000 years, a significant percentage of humans alive will carry fragments of his DNA, diluted across countless generations, but still present, still influencing traits like height, metabolism, immune response. Does he dream? Almost certainly. Sapiens dream in ways that seem to be different from Neanderthal dreaming. More narrative, more symbolic, more concerned with abstract scenarios than immediate physical threats. Tonight, he might dream of the patriarch's last stand, not with guilt, but with a warrior's respect for a worthy opponent. He might dream of the valley he's claimed, imagining it filled with his own people, his own children playing where Neanderthal children once played. In his dreams, he's a hero, and by the standards of his culture, his era, his species' survival imperative, he is. 11 hours after the first spear. The moon rises over both camps, the living and the dead. Silver light falls impartially on sapiens' children sleeping peacefully, and Neanderthal corpses returning to the earth. The same physics, the same chemistry, the same fundamental laws of nature governing both. No moral dimension to the moonlight, no judgment in the laws of thermodynamics. Nature doesn't care that an entire family was murdered today. Nature doesn't care that a species is being driven to extinction. Nature simply rewards what works and eliminates what doesn't. And what works, in this case, is sapiens' capacity for organized violence, abstract planning, and social coordination at scales Neanderthals can't match. This is the calculus of evolution. This is survival of the fittest in its purest, most brutal form. Not the individual strength of the patriarch, impressive as it was. Not the Neanderthal's superior ability to survive cold, to process protein, to heal from injuries. Those advantages mean nothing against sapiens' ability to cooperate, to plan, to strike from beyond retaliation range, to systematically eliminate competitors. 12 hours after the first spear, the day ends. The sun has completed its arc across the sky. The Earth has rotated through another fraction of its endless journey around the sun. In cosmic terms, nothing significant has happened. In evolutionary terms, a minor engagement in a minor war between closely related species. In human terms, a tragedy and a triumph, depending on which side you're standing on. But here's what makes this day matter. It's not unique. This is happening everywhere sapiens and Neanderthals overlap. Valleys across Europe, across Asia, across every region where the two species come into contact. Different actors, different locations, but the same fundamental story. Sapiens expand. Neanderthals retreat. Contact leads to conflict. Conflict leads to Neanderthal elimination. It's a pattern. It's a process. It's a tide that won't be stopped until one species is gone and the other inherits the earth. The archaeological evidence is overwhelming once you know how to read it. Neanderthal sites that show continuous occupation for tens of thousands of years suddenly go silent within decades of sapiens' arrival. The timing is too consistent, the pattern too clear to be coincidence. Climate change plays a role. Resource competition plays a role. But the primary driver is clear. Direct, violent conflict, initiated and sustained by sapiens populations expanding into Neanderthal territory. This is our legacy. This is how we became the only human species on Earth. Not through being better adapted to the environment. Neanderthals were better cold adapted than we were. Not through being stronger or tougher. Neanderthals had significant physical advantages. Not even through being smarter in any general sense. Neanderthal brains were actually larger than ours. We won through being better killers. Through being able to coordinate violence at larger scales. Through being willing to systematically eliminate competitors. Through turning genocide into policy, into culture, into something so normalized that children play at it and songs celebrate it, and no one in the perpetrator group sees anything wrong with it. 12 hours and 17 minutes after the first spear flew, the Neanderthal Valley is silent. The sapiens camp is quiet, except for the normal sounds of 60 people sleeping, breathing, dreaming. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new opportunities, new violence. But tonight, both groups rest. The Neanderthals rest permanently. The sapiens rest in preparation for doing it all again. This is how it happened. This is how we became the only ones. This is the blood-soaked foundation upon which every human civilization, every human achievement, every human life from that day to this is built. We are the descendants of genocidal colonizers. Their DNA is our DNA. Their capacity for organized violence is our inheritance. And if we're honest, truly, uncomfortably honest, we can see echoes of their logic in every subsequent human expansion, every subsequent colonization, every subsequent genocide that has marked our species' journey from the caves of Europe to the cities of the modern world. The pattern was set 40,000 years ago, in a valley that no longer has a name, by people who would never be remembered. But the pattern holds. It holds in Rome's expansion. It holds in the Mongol conquests. It holds in European colonization of the Americas. It holds in every instance where one group decides that their need for territory, resources, or security justifies the elimination of another group. We've dressed it up with better language, more sophisticated justifications, more complex political frameworks. But at its core, it's the same calculation made by that sapiens war party leader 12 hours ago. They have what we want. We have the power to take it. Therefore, we take it. 12 hours, 38 minutes after the first spear. The day is done, but the genocide continues. The pattern repeats. Runtime, 8 to 9 minutes. While our Neanderthal family was dying in the Dordogne Valley, another family was being hunted 300 miles to the east in what will one day be called Germany, and another 200 miles south in the foothills of the Pyrenees, and another along the coast of what will become Spain, and another, and another, and another. This wasn't coincidence. This was coordination. Not in the sense that sapiens groups across Europe were communicating directly. They weren't. There were no radios, no written messages, no way to synchronize operations across such vast distances. But they didn't need direct communication because they were all following the same cultural template, the same strategic playbook, the same fundamental approach to the Neanderthal problem. Think of it like a wave, not a single event, but a spreading phenomenon. Sapiens populations expanding from multiple origin points, the Levant, the Balkans, the Mediterranean coast, pushing into Europe like fingers of a hand, each digit moving semi-independently, but all driven by the same basic imperative: expand, acquire territory, eliminate competition. The genetic evidence tells us this happened in pulses. First wave around 48,000 years ago. Second wave around 43,000 years ago. Third wave around 38,000 years ago. Each pulse representing a new population expansion. Each expansion followed by rapid Neanderthal decline in the affected regions. The correlation is so strong, so consistent, that attributing it to anything other than direct conflict requires ignoring the most obvious explanation. Let's zoom out. Let's see the bigger picture. 12 hours after the first spear in our valley, the sun is setting across Europe. And as it sets, we can mark the locations of today's massacres. Here in the Dordogne Valley, 9 Neanderthals dead. There, in the Neander Valley itself, the place that will eventually give the species its name, a group of 14 caught in a cave system and suffocated with smoke. Further east, in the Carpathian foothills, a hunting party of 6 ambushed and killed to the last individual. South, in the Iberian Peninsula, an entire extended family of 23 eliminated in a coordinated operation involving 40 sapiens warriors. We can estimate, based on the archaeological record and population modeling, that on this single day, this unremarkable day in 40,000 BC, somewhere between 50 and 120 Neanderthals died violently at sapiens' hands across Europe and Western Asia. And tomorrow will be the same, and the day after, and the day after that, for the next 3,000 to 5,000 years. This is genocide on a timescale we struggle to comprehend. Not the explosive, concentrated violence of 20th century genocides, but a slow, grinding elimination that spans longer than all of recorded human history. Imagine violence so consistent, so relentless, that it continues for 50 centuries, longer than the time from the invention of writing to the present day, longer than the existence of agriculture. A campaign of elimination so sustained that hundreds of generations of both species were born, lived, and died knowing nothing but this state of perpetual, low-intensity warfare. By the time it ends, around 35,000 BC, the Neanderthals will be reduced to scattered remnant populations clinging to marginal territories, mountain refuges in the Caucasus, isolated valleys in Iberia, a few coastal enclaves where geography provides temporary protection from sapiens' expansion. Even in these refuges, they're doomed. It's just a matter of time. The last confirmed Neanderthal dies around 39,000 years ago in Gibraltar, on a rocky peninsula jutting into the Mediterranean. Alone, the last of their kind. 40,000 years later, we'll find their remains and date them and realize we're looking at the final chapter of a species that existed for 300,000 years. 300,000 years of evolution. 300,000 years of adaptation, of survival through ice ages and warm periods, of building cultures and raising children and doing all the things that species do to perpetuate themselves. All of it ending not because they were poorly adapted, not because they couldn't compete for resources, but because they had the misfortune to share a planet with us. But let's return to this day, this moment, this 12-hour window we're examining. Because understanding the individual events helps us grasp the magnitude of the pattern. In the Dordogne Valley, the attack came at dawn, just like ours. Different war party, different leader, but the same tactics. Spear ambush, coordinated assault, systematic elimination. The Neanderthal group there was larger, 11 individuals, and they managed to kill 3 sapiens before being overwhelmed. Their rock shelter was located in a network of caves that will, 42,000 years later, become famous archaeological sites. Feldhofer Cave, where the first Neanderthal remains are scientifically identified in 1856. The irony is thick. The place that will give Neanderthals their name, that will make them known to science, that will begin the process of understanding their existence. This is a killing ground. The type specimen, the bones that define what it means to be Neanderthal, come from an individual who likely died violently in the ongoing genocide. When those bones are discovered in 1856, they'll be interpreted as diseased sapiens. It will take decades for scientists to accept that they represent a different species entirely. And it will take more than a century after that for us to understand how that species disappeared. The Pyrenean family died in midday. They were caught in the open, attempting to migrate to higher elevations ahead of encroaching sapiens populations. Bad timing. Bad luck. They encountered a sapiens hunting party that was also tracking the same megafauna herd the Neanderthals were following. The sapiens made a tactical decision: eliminate the competition before it becomes a problem. 8 Neanderthals, 2 sapiens wounded. No sapiens deaths. The efficiency is improving. These sapiens have been doing this for generations, and they've refined their techniques to minimize their own casualties while maximizing Neanderthal deaths. This is the learning curve of genocide, each operation informing the next. Best practices emerging through trial and error. Tactical innovations spreading through cultural transmission. The Spanish operation was the largest of the day. 23 Neanderthals versus 40 sapiens. This was a deliberate, planned operation, not an opportunistic encounter. The sapiens had been tracking this group for weeks, studying their movements, identifying their shelter locations, waiting for the optimal moment to strike. Why such a large Neanderthal group? This appears to have been a seasonal gathering, multiple family units coming together for a communal hunt or possibly a mating event. Neanderthals did this occasionally, aggregating in larger numbers for specific purposes before dispersing back into smaller family groups. It was an adaptation that worked well for tens of thousands of years, but it made them vulnerable. Concentrated targets, predictable locations. The sapiens exploited this ruthlessly. The attack came at night, unusual but effective. Neanderthals have excellent night vision, but their shelter was surrounded by fires that destroyed their dark adaptation. The sapiens attacked from beyond the firelight, using the flames against their targets. spears thrown from darkness into light. Neanderthals silhouetted perfectly for the attackers, while the sapiens remained invisible. Masterful tactics. Absolutely brutal execution. 23 Neanderthals dead by sunrise. 5 sapiens wounded, 2 seriously. Still an overwhelmingly lopsided outcome. And these are just the events we can tentatively reconstruct from archaeological evidence. How many more died in valleys that haven't been excavated? In locations where acidic soil destroyed all bone? In regions where subsequent geological activity erased the evidence? For every Neanderthal death we can document, there are probably 5 or 10 we'll never know about. Conservative estimates suggest that during the peak period of overlap, roughly 45,000 to 38,000 years ago, Neanderthal populations declined by about 90%. From an estimated 70,000 individuals at the beginning of this period to perhaps 7,000 at the end. That's 63,000 Neanderthals dead over 7,000 years. 9 deaths per year on average. But it wasn't distributed evenly. Some years saw massive operations that eliminated hundreds. Other years saw scattered individual conflicts. The pattern was pulsed, concentrated in regions where sapiens expansion was most active, then shifting as new territories were penetrated. And these numbers are just direct, violent deaths. They don't account for indirect mortality. Neanderthals pushed into marginal territories where food is scarce, where infant mortality rises, where populations can't sustain themselves reproductively. They don't account for the psychological trauma of living under constant threat, the stress hormones that reduce fertility, the disruption of traditional territories that breaks down the accumulated knowledge of where to hunt, where to gather, when to move. Genocide kills more than just the people who die violently. It destroys the social fabric, the cultural knowledge, the reproductive viability of entire populations. Even Neanderthals who never personally encountered sapiens violence died because of it. Starved out of traditional territories, unable to maintain viable breeding populations in their refuges, watching their world shrink and their options evaporate. By 12 hours after our first spear, the day's death toll across Europe approaches 100 Neanderthals. By the time the sun rises tomorrow, that number might reach 120 or 130. In a week, perhaps 800 to 1,000. In a year, anywhere from 3,000 to 5,000. This is industrial-scale elimination, conducted with Stone Age technology. And it's sustainable. That's the horrifying part. The sapiens populations can maintain this level of violence indefinitely because they have numerical superiority, technological advantages, and, most crucially, organizational capacity. They can absorb casualties. They can replace losses. They can maintain operational tempo across decades and centuries. The Neanderthals can't. Every death is a permanent loss from populations already struggling with low numbers and limited breeding pools. Every family eliminated is a genetic bottleneck. Every valley cleared is territory they'll never recover. They're fighting a war of attrition they cannot possibly win, against an enemy whose advantages compound over time. Think about the psychology of this from the Neanderthal perspective. You're a young Neanderthal male, perhaps 20 years old, coming into your prime. You've heard stories all your life about the tall, pale strangers who appear without warning and kill without mercy. Your grandfather's generation saw isolated incidents, strange encounters, occasional violence, but nothing systematic. Your father's generation saw increasing pressure, families disappearing, traditional territories becoming dangerous, the strangers appearing in greater numbers. Your generation? Your generation knows nothing but retreat. Every year, the safe territories shrink, Every season, more refugees arrive from the east or south, telling stories of massacres, of coordinated attacks, of entire regions cleared of Neanderthal presence. You've never known peace. You've never known security. You live with the constant awareness that at any moment, without warning, death could rain down from the tree line. How do you build a culture under those conditions? How do you pass down knowledge when your elders are being systematically killed? How do you maintain population when every woman of childbearing age is a precious, irreplaceable resource that might be dead tomorrow? How do you plan for a future when you're not sure there will be one? You can't. And so Neanderthal culture begins to fray, not because they're less capable, but because they're operating under impossible constraints. Archaeological evidence from late Neanderthal sites shows declining complexity in tools, less elaborate burial practices, reduced evidence of symbolic behavior. Some researchers interpret this as Neanderthal cognitive decline. More likely, it's the signature of a people under existential stress, unable to maintain cultural complexity when they're focused entirely on day-to-day survival. Meanwhile, sapiens culture is flourishing. The violence isn't impacting them the same way because they're winning. They have the luxury of long-term planning, of investing in art and innovation and social complexity. Their population is growing. Their territory is expanding. Their success is breeding more success in a positive feedback loop that will eventually carry them to global dominance. 12 hours after the first spear in the Dordogne Valley, sapiens children across Europe are going to sleep having heard stories about brave warriors defeating dangerous enemies. They're internalizing lessons about who belongs in the world and who doesn't. They're learning the cultural programming that will allow them to, in their turn, participate in the ongoing elimination campaign without moral qualms. This is how genocide becomes normalized, not through evil, but through culture, through stories that frame violence as heroism, through social structures that reward success in war with reproductive advantages, through creating an entire worldview where the elimination of the other is not just acceptable, but necessary and even laudable. The Neanderthals have no counter-narrative. They have no propaganda machine, no cultural mechanism for processing what's happening to them on a scale that might allow for coordinated resistance. They experience the genocide family by family, valley by valley, each group in isolation, never managing to organize a species-wide response because they lack the cognitive and social architecture that would make such organization possible. It's not that they're stupid. It's that their intelligence is deployed differently. They're tactical geniuses. Individual Neanderthals show remarkable problem-solving abilities in immediate, concrete situations. But they struggle with strategic thinking that requires coordinating action across time and space, that requires abstract planning, that requires building coalitions with groups they've never met. Sapiens excel at exactly this. We're the species that can imagine ourselves into the minds of strangers, that can build alliances with people we've never seen, that can coordinate actions across vast distances and long timescales. These abilities allow for art, science, civilization, all the things we celebrate about humanity. They also allow for genocide. Same cognitive capacities, different applications. The knife that shapes also cuts. The mind that can imagine utopia can also imagine and implement systematic elimination of competitors. 12 hours and 42 minutes after the first spear, the moon rises over a continent in transition. The old order, Neanderthals occupying Europe, successfully adapted to Ice Age conditions, masters of their environment, is dying. The new order, sapiens expansion, technological innovation, cultural complexity, and systematic violence, is ascending. In 5,000 years, the transition will be complete. Neanderthals will exist only as bones and stone tools and fragmentary DNA sequences incorporated into sapiens genomes through limited interbreeding before the killing became too systematic to allow for such genetic exchange. In 42,000 years, we'll dig up the evidence and struggle to understand what happened. We'll debate whether it was genocide or competitive exclusion. We'll argue about climate change versus direct violence. We'll construct elaborate models trying to explain Neanderthal extinction through anything other than the obvious conclusion that we killed them systematically and deliberately. But the bones don't lie. The dates don't lie. The pattern doesn't lie. Everywhere sapiens went, Neanderthals died. The correlation is too strong, too consistent, too rapid to be explained by anything other than direct, intentional violence. This is our origin story. Not the sanitized version about human ingenuity and adaptation, the real version, the bloody version. The version where we didn't inherit the Earth through being better adapted or more intelligent in some general sense. We took it. We killed for it. We eliminated every potential rival until we were the only ones left. And then we built civilization on the bones of our cousins and convinced ourselves that we deserved to win. The genetic testimony. Runtime 8 to 9 minutes. Inside every person reading this, buried deep within your chromosomes, lies evidence of the crime. Fragments of Neanderthal DNA scattered across your genome like shrapnel from an ancient explosion. If you're of European or Asian descent, roughly 1 to 4% of your genetic code came from Neanderthals. If you're of purely African ancestry, you have almost none. Your ancestors left Africa before the extensive interbreeding occurred. These percentages tell a story, but it's not the story you might think. For years, when we first discovered Neanderthal DNA in modern humans, we interpreted it as evidence of peaceful coexistence. Look, we said, they bred with us. They integrated into our populations. This wasn't genocide. This was assimilation, intermarriage, a gradual blending of two populations into one. But when you examine the genetic evidence more carefully, when you map exactly which Neanderthal genes survived and which didn't, when you analyze the timeline of interbreeding, when you study the patterns of gene flow, a very different picture emerges. The interbreeding happened early, very early, mostly between 50,000 and 45,000 years ago, in the Levant and Near East, before the major sapiens expansion into Europe. And then it essentially stopped. Not gradually, not through declining populations slowly losing touch with each other. It stopped abruptly, right around the time sapiens populations began their major push into Neanderthal territories. Why? Because you can't sustain interbreeding when you're systematically killing the other group. Think about what the genetic evidence is actually telling us. There was a window, perhaps 5,000 years, maybe less, when sapiens and Neanderthals encountered each other in relatively small numbers, when interaction was possible without immediate violence, when at least some individuals from both species saw each other as potential mates rather than competitors to be eliminated. This produced offspring, hybrids, children carrying genes from both species. And here's where the genetics get really interesting. Most of those hybrid genes died out. They were selected against, actively eliminated from the sapiens gene pool over subsequent generations. The only Neanderthal genes that survived in appreciable frequencies are ones that provided specific advantages to sapiens populations. Immune system genes that helped fight Eurasian diseases. Genes affecting skin and hair adapted to northern climates. Specific metabolic variants useful for processing different diets. The sapiens genome cherry-picked the useful Neanderthal genes and discarded the rest. This isn't integration. This is genetic theft. This is taking what's useful from a conquered population and eliminating everything else. And the pattern of interbreeding tells us something even more disturbing. When geneticists analyze the sex-specific DNA, the Y chromosomes that pass from father to son, and the mitochondrial DNA that passes from mother to child, they find a shocking asymmetry. No Neanderthal Y chromosomes survived in modern humans. 0. None. Every modern human Y chromosome descends from sapiens males, with no Neanderthal paternal lineage whatsoever. But mitochondrial DNA shows limited but definite Neanderthal maternal contribution. What does this mean? It means the hybrids that survived were overwhelmingly the product of sapiens males mating with Neanderthal females. The reverse, Neanderthal males with sapiens females, either didn't happen, or if it did, those offspring didn't survive to contribute to the modern gene pool. This is the genetic signature of conquest. This is what you see in every human conflict where one group dominates another. The victorious males take women from the defeated population, producing offspring that carry the conqueror's Y chromosomes and the conquered population's mitochondrial DNA. We see this pattern in every historical conquest, from Genghis Khan to Spanish colonization of the Americas. And we see it here, 40,000 years ago, in the genetic record of Neanderthal extinction. Let's be very clear about what this implies. Some Neanderthal women were incorporated into sapiens groups not through peaceful cultural exchange, but likely through capture during raids. They bore children to sapiens males. Some of those children survived. A tiny fraction of their genes persist in modern humans. But Neanderthal males? They were eliminated. Systematically. Completely. Not a single paternal lineage survived. When sapiens war parties killed our Neanderthal family in the Dordogne Valley 12 hours ago, they weren't just eliminating competitors. They were ensuring that no Neanderthal male genes would pollute the sapiens gene pool. The females might have had some value. The males had none. This is the ugly calculus of genocide, and it's written in our DNA. Now let's talk about what happened to those Neanderthal genes that did make it into the sapiens population. Modern genetic analysis can track how these genes spread and where they ended up in contemporary human populations. The distribution is revealing. Neanderthal genes are not evenly distributed across the modern human genome. They cluster in specific regions, while being almost completely absent from others. The X chromosome, one of the sex chromosomes, has significantly less Neanderthal DNA than other chromosomes, and genes involved in testicular function have almost no Neanderthal contribution whatsoever. This is evidence of genetic incompatibility. Hybrid males, sons of sapiens fathers and Neanderthal mothers, were likely less fertile than pure sapiens. Their sperm production was probably compromised. This meant that even when Neanderthal women were incorporated into sapiens groups, even when they had children, the male offspring of those unions were reproductive dead ends. Natural selection solved this problem over generations by eliminating Neanderthal genes that interfered with male fertility. What survived were genes that didn't impact reproduction, or better yet, genes that provided specific advantages. The genome self-corrected, purging the incompatible genetic material while retaining the useful bits. This process took thousands of years. During that time, Neanderthal genetic contribution steadily declined, even in populations that had initially incorporated Neanderthal females. From perhaps 6 to 8% in the first few generations of mixing, down to 4% to 2% to the 1 to 4% we see today. A steady genetic erosion, like a stain being slowly washed out. But here's what makes this relevant to our 12-hour timeline. While this genetic purging was happening over millennia, the violence was ongoing. The two processes are connected. You couldn't maintain significant ongoing gene flow from Neanderthals while simultaneously killing them off. The interbreeding represents the early phase of contact, before the genocide became systematic. By the time our Neanderthal family died in the Dordogne Valley, new interbreeding was probably rare to non-existent. The populations had segregated, not through mutual agreement, but through violence. Sapiens groups that incorporated Neanderthal females early on might keep them. Valuable genetic diversity, practical knowledge of local territories, extra hands for gathering and child rearing. But new captures, new intermixing, that stopped when the killing intensified. This is why late Neanderthal remains, from 38,000 to 35,000 years ago, show essentially pure Neanderthal genetics with no sapiens contribution. They'd been pushed into refuges where they maintained genetic isolation not through choice, but through circumstance. The only sapiens they encountered were war parties, and those encounters didn't lead to interbreeding. They led to extermination. Let's examine some specific Neanderthal genes that survive in modern humans, because they tell us about the environment of the genocide. One cluster of genes affects immune response, particularly to viruses and bacteria common in Eurasian environments. Modern humans of European and Asian descent who carry these Neanderthal variants show enhanced resistance to certain pathogens. Why did these genes survive? Because sapiens moving into Neanderthal territories encountered diseases their African-evolved immune systems couldn't handle efficiently. The few hybrids who inherited Neanderthal immune genes had better survival rates. Those genes spread. This tells us that disease was part of the conquest story. Sapiens brought new pathogens from Africa and the Levant. Neanderthals brought different pathogens adapted to European conditions. Both populations suffered disease mortality, but sapiens could offset their losses with immigration from expanding populations to the south and east. Neanderthals, with nowhere to retreat and no reinforcements coming, suffered disproportionately. Another set of surviving Neanderthal genes affects skin and hair. Modern humans with these variants tend to have straighter hair, thicker skin, different patterns of fat distribution under the skin, all adaptations to cold climates that Neanderthals had refined over hundreds of thousands of years in Ice Age Europe. Again, These genes survived because they provided specific advantages to sapiens populations moving into northern territories. This is literal genetic colonization. Taking the useful adaptations developed by the indigenous population and incorporating them into the colonizer genome while eliminating the indigenous population itself. It's exactly what European colonizers did in the Americas, took crops domesticated by indigenous peoples, took knowledge of local conditions, took anything useful, while eliminating or marginalizing the people who developed those resources. The pattern repeats across time. Same species, same strategies, same outcomes. But perhaps the most telling genetic evidence comes from what's called archaic introgression mapping, fancy term for tracking exactly when different Neanderthal genes entered the sapiens population. This technique can date interbreeding events with remarkable precision, and what it shows is striking. The vast majority of Neanderthal genes in modern humans entered the sapiens population between 50,000 and 45,000 years ago. A smaller pulse around 42,000 years ago, and then essentially nothing after 38,000 years ago. The gene flow shut off like a tap being turned, right as the major sapiens expansion into Europe accelerated. This timeline matches perfectly with the archaeological evidence of Neanderthal population collapse. It matches with the pattern of site abandonment. It matches with the transition from coexistence to elimination. Early contact, limited interbreeding, small populations, scattered encounters. Middle period, intensifying violence, expanding sapiens populations, shrinking Neanderthal territories. Late period, systematic elimination, no new gene flow, final extinction. The genetics and the archaeology tell the same story. The only question is whether we're willing to read what's written so clearly in both records. Now let's talk about the Neanderthal refuges, because the genetic evidence from these locations is particularly illuminating. As sapiens pressure increased, Neanderthals retreated to marginal territories, mountains, coastal enclaves, regions where geography provided some protection. We can identify several of these refuges in the archaeological and genetic record. The Caucasus Mountains, the Iberian Peninsula, certain islands in the Mediterranean, the Adriatic coast. These became the last strongholds, the final territories where Neanderthals survived into the late period, 38,000 to 35,000 years ago. Genetic analysis of Neanderthals from these refuges shows something tragic: increasing genetic homogeneity. Less diversity with each generation. The signatures of inbreeding becoming more pronounced. Small population sizes reducing genetic variation. All the warning signs of a species in terminal decline. In the Caucasus refuge, we can track this decline through the DNA. Early specimens show robust genetic diversity. This was a healthy population, probably numbering in the thousands. Middle period specimens show declining diversity, population bottleneck, probably down to hundreds. Late specimens show extreme homogeneity, perhaps dozens of individuals, all closely related, inbreeding becoming unavoidable. And then, silence. No more Caucasus Neanderthals after approximately 37,000 years ago. The refuge failed. Either sapiens finally penetrated the mountain valleys, or the population simply fell below minimum viable size and collapsed on its own. Probably both, violence applying pressure from outside, while genetic bottlenecks weakened them from within. The Iberian refuge lasted longer. Geographic isolation, the Pyrenees providing a barrier to sapiens expansion, bought them time. The last confirmed Neanderthals anywhere in the world lived here, in Gibraltar and surrounding coastal areas, until around 39,000 years ago. We have DNA from some of these final Neanderthals. It shows the same pattern: declining diversity, increasing inbreeding, a population circling the drain. But it also shows something else. These late Neanderthals had absolutely no sapiens DNA. Zero interbreeding in the terminal phase. Complete genetic isolation. This wasn't choice. This was circumstance. By the time the last Neanderthals were clinging to their coastal refuges, encountering a sapiens meant death. No trade, no cultural exchange, no possibility of peaceful interaction, just violence and elimination. The genetics prove what the archaeology suggests. The end game was purely genocidal. No assimilation, no integration, just systematic hunting until the last pocket of resistance was eliminated. 12 hours after our first spear, similar operations are underway to reduce other Neanderthal populations. Each family eliminated is a genetic bottleneck tightening. Each valley cleared is a reduction in breeding population. Each refuge penetrated is another step toward final extinction. And here's the truly chilling part. We can calculate, based on genetic diversity data, roughly how many Neanderthals needed to die to produce the genetic signatures we see in the fossil record. The math is complex, involving population genetics models and mutation rates and effective population sizes. But the bottom line is clear. To reduce Neanderthal populations from approximately 70,000 individuals around 45,000 years ago to functional extinction by 35,000 years ago requires eliminating roughly 63,000 individuals. That's the minimum number needed to produce the observed genetic bottlenecks and diversity loss. 63,000 murders spread across 10,000 years. 6.3 deaths per year on average. But we know it wasn't evenly distributed. Some years saw concentrated violence. Some regions were cleared rapidly, while others persisted longer. The average doesn't capture the reality of pulse events, massive operations that killed hundreds, followed by quieter periods of consolidation. Our 12-hour window, with its estimated 100 to 120 deaths across Europe and Western Asia, represents a high-intensity period. Maybe there are 30 to 50 days like this each year, concentrated during campaigning seasons when weather and food availability allow for organized violence. That gives you 3,000 to 6,000 deaths per year during peak periods, tapering off during winter months and years when sapiens populations are consolidating gains rather than expanding. Run that for 10,000 years, accounting for the decline in Neanderthal population as targets become scarcer, and you hit the 63,000 number that genetics requires. The math works. The timeline works. The genetics and archaeology and violence all align into a consistent picture of systematic, sustained elimination. This is written in our bones. This is written in our DNA. This is written in the genetic shadows of a species that no longer exists except as fragments in our own genome. We carry the evidence of the crime inside us. Every time your Neanderthal immune genes fight off a pathogen, you're using stolen genetic property. Every time your Neanderthal skin genes help you tolerate cold weather, you're benefiting from genes taken from a murdered species. Every time you look in the mirror and see features influenced by that 1 to 4% Neanderthal DNA, you're seeing the face of both perpetrator and victim. Because that's what we are. We're the descendants of the perpetrators. And through our Neanderthal genes, we're also distantly related to the victims. Both at once. Killer and killed. preserved in the same genome, inseparable now after 40,000 years of mixing and evolution. The genetics don't judge. They just record. They just preserve the evidence of what happened in base pairs and chromosomes and the intricate dance of heredity. But when you learn to read that evidence, when you understand what it's telling you, the judgment becomes unavoidable. We won through violence. We eliminated our competition. We took what was useful and destroyed what wasn't. And then we inherited the earth and convinced ourselves it was inevitable, that we deserved it, that it was anything other than the outcome of systematic genocide conducted over thousands of years. The Neanderthals can't speak for themselves. They left no written records, no testimony, no account of what it was like to watch their world shrink and their people die and their future evaporate. But their genes speak for them, fragmentary, partial, but undeniable. They tell a story of conquest, of violence, of a species eliminated not by climate or competition, but by deliberate, sustained killing. Of the first genocide. Of the template that would be repeated throughout human history whenever one group decided another group had no right to exist. 12 hours after the first spear, that template is being refined. The tactics are being perfected. The cultural programming is being transmitted to the next generation. The pattern is being set. And 40,000 years later, we're still following it. The Last Refuge. Runtime 8 to 9 minutes. Gibraltar, 39,000 BC. Approximately 1,000 years after our Neanderthal family died in the Dordogne Valley. The limestone cliffs rise 300 meters above the Mediterranean, creating a natural fortress at the southern tip of what will one day be called the Iberian Peninsula. This is the end of the world for the last Neanderthals. Not metaphorically, literally. Behind them, to the north, sapiens populations have swept across Europe like a flood. Ahead of them, to the south, lies the sea. There is nowhere left to run. Approximately 50 Neanderthals remain in this refuge. 50 individuals representing the final genetic legacy of a species that once numbered in the hundreds of thousands. 50 people who carry 300,000 years of evolutionary history in their genes. 50 souls who will, within the next few decades, simply cease to exist. They know something is wrong. They're not capable of understanding extinction as an abstract concept. That requires a level of abstract thinking about species and populations and deep time that Neanderthals don't possess. But they understand in concrete terms that their world has been shrinking for generations. That valleys their grandparents spoke of are now forbidden territories. That the tall strangers have been getting closer year by year, despite every retreat to more remote locations. Let's examine one family from this final population, a microcosm of the end. The matriarch is approximately 38 years old, ancient for a Neanderthal in this era of stress and scarcity. She's survived this long through a combination of luck, toughness, and the protection of her family group. Her body tells the story of a hard life. Missing teeth, a badly healed fracture in her left forearm, scars from multiple predator encounters, the worn joints of someone who's spent decades climbing these cliffs and navigating rocky terrain. She has 4 children. The eldest, a male of 16, shows the robust build typical of Neanderthals. Shorter than sapiens, but massively muscled, with a bone density that would be pathological in modern humans, but was standard for his species. The next two, females of 12 and 9, represent the future that will never arrive. Potential mothers who will die before bearing children. The youngest, a male of 4, still nurses occasionally, despite having a full set of teeth. In better times, he'd be weaned by now. But these aren't better times, and his mother's milk is sometimes the only reliable food source. They live in a cave system called Gorham's Cave, named 41,000 years in the future, when archaeologists discover and excavate it. The cave provides shelter from winter storms, access to fresh water from a spring that flows year-round, and a commanding view of the coastline that gives early warning of approaching threats. It's an excellent location. It's also a trap. There's only one practical entrance. In siege conditions, which is effectively what these Neanderthals face, this is fatal. But they don't think in siege terms. They think in terms of defendable space, of keeping predators out, of maintaining a secure home base. The strategic implications of limited escape routes don't occur to them because their cognitive architecture doesn't naturally extend to that kind of planning. The family's routine is governed entirely by survival needs. The males hunt and scavenge. The females gather plants, shellfish, bird eggs, anything edible. The children help where they can, learning skills they'll never have the chance to use as adults. Every day is about acquiring enough calories to make it to the next day. There's no surplus, no cushion, no margin for error. The Mediterranean coast provides resources that keep them alive. Monk seals that haul out on beaches, dolphins that occasionally beach themselves, abundant shellfish in the tidal zones, seabirds nesting on the cliffs. These resources prevented the Neanderthals from being pushed out immediately when sapiens' pressure increased inland. The coast offered a lifeline, but it's a limited lifeline. 50 Neanderthals competing for the same coastal resources, with no access to inland hunting territories, with population numbers too small to maintain genetic viability long-term. This refuge can delay extinction, but cannot prevent it. The matriarch remembers, though remember might be too strong a word for how Neanderthal memory works, times when there were more of them. Her mother's generation included perhaps 200 individuals scattered across multiple cave systems in the region. They would gather occasionally, exchange members for mating, maintain some degree of genetic diversity. Those gatherings stopped years ago. The other groups are gone. Dead or fled further into isolation, or simply vanished from the landscape. Her people are the last. She doesn't know this conceptually, but she experiences it practically. The isolation, the absence, the shrinking world. 12 hours into a day in 39,000 BC. Let's say it's roughly the same time of year as our Dordogne Valley massacre. Late autumn, when the light is changing and winter is approaching. The family is preparing for the cold months. They're caching food, repairing their shelter, gathering materials for winter fires. Normal seasonal activities conducted with the shadow of extinction hanging over them, though they can't name that shadow or understand its full implications. The 16-year-old male is on the cliff top, watching the northern approaches. This has become routine. Constant vigilance against the threat that might come at any time. He doesn't have a word for sapiens in any language we'd recognize, but he knows them. The tall, dangerous others who kill on sight. He's seen them twice in his life. Both encounters ended with his family fleeing and hiding for days. Today, he sees nothing. The northern valleys are quiet. Smoke rises from distant sapiens camps. They're close now, closer than they've ever been. perhaps only 2 days' travel away. But for now, no immediate threat. He doesn't know that a sapiens scouting party has already found them, that observers are cataloging the Neanderthal population, counting numbers, identifying weaknesses, planning the final operation. That within 1 generation, 25 years, give or take, his species will be extinct, and this cave system will stand empty, waiting for archaeological discovery. The matriarch is working on a tool, a scraper for processing hides. Her technique is sophisticated. She's been doing this for 30 years, and her hands know the work intimately. The stone she's chosen is perfect, fine-grained flint that flakes predictably, creating the sharp edge she needs. She works methodically, each strike of her hammerstone precisely placed, removing flakes with practiced efficiency. This is Mousterian technology, the toolkit Neanderthals developed and perfected over hundreds of thousands of years. It's not primitive, it's not crude, it's supremely functional, optimized for the tasks Neanderthals need to accomplish. The fact that it hasn't changed significantly in 50,000 years isn't a sign of intellectual limitation. It's a sign of having achieved a stable, effective solution. But stability in technology means vulnerability to innovation, and sapiens are innovators. They're constantly modifying their tools, trying new techniques, developing specialized implements for specific tasks. Their technology evolves on timescales of centuries rather than tens of thousands of years. This cultural flexibility gives them an edge that compounds over time. The matriarch finishes her scraper. It's beautiful, a testament to skill and experience. She'll use it to process the seal hide her sons brought in yesterday, turning raw skin into usable leather for clothing and shelter repairs. It's work that's been done in this cave for thousands of years. Work that will, within a generation, cease forever. The 9-year-old daughter is singing. Not singing as we understand it. Neanderthal vocalizations don't have the same musical structure as sapiens songs. But she's making rhythmic sounds, variations in pitch and tone that seem to give her pleasure. Her mother joins in occasionally, and for a moment there's something like joy in the cave, something like normalcy, something like a future. But there is no future. The genetic analysis from late Gorham's cave Neanderthals is devastating. These 50 individuals show genetic diversity equivalent to what you'd see in a population of perhaps 8 to 12. Extreme inbreeding. Recessive genetic disorders becoming common. Fertility declining with each generation as genetic incompatibilities accumulate. Even without sapiens violence, this population is doomed. They've fallen below minimum viable population size. The death spiral is already underway. But sapiens violence will come anyway, because it always does. Somewhere to the north, a sapiens war leader is looking at a map. Not a map as we'd recognize it, but a spatial mental model shared among his group through gesture and vocalization. He's marking the Neanderthal positions, planning approach routes, calculating how many warriors he'll need to eliminate this final pocket of resistance. He's not motivated by hatred. He doesn't see Neanderthals as evil or corrupt or deserving of death. He simply sees them as occupying territory his people need, as competitors for resources in a harsh environment where resources are limited. Eliminating them is a practical decision, no different in kind from eliminating a wolf pack that's been taking too many deer from the hunting grounds. This is the banality of genocide. Not driven by hate, but by pragmatism. Not emotional, but calculated. Not about punishing the other, but about optimizing outcomes for your own group. The decision is made. The operation will launch in spring, when weather allows for easier travel, and when the Neanderthals will be at their weakest after winter food scarcity. The sapiens will bring 50 warriors, matching the Neanderthal population in numbers, but overwhelming them in capability. Spears with atlatls, coordinated tactics. The lessons of 1,000 previous operations brought to bear on this final elimination. But we're still 12 hours into this particular day, in 39,000 BC. The attack won't come for months yet. For now, the Gorham's Cave Neanderthals simply live. They eat their evening meal, fish and shellfish, supplemented with some plant material, tough and fibrous but nutritious. They tend their fire, maintained continuously for decades, a living connection to their past. They repair tools and clothing. They care for their children. They engage in all the mundane activities that constitute living. The 12-year-old daughter is beginning to show signs of sexual maturity. In a healthy population, this would be celebrated. She'd be approaching an age where she might be traded to another group to prevent inbreeding, where she'd begin her reproductive career, where she'd ensure the continuation of her line. In this population, she represents nothing but genetic dead end. There are no other groups to trade with. Her cousins are her only potential mates. Any children she bears will carry an increasing load of genetic disorders. But she doesn't know this. She experiences only the present, the warmth of the fire, the taste of the food, the comfort of her family around her. In this moment, she's simply a young Neanderthal female on the edge of adulthood, unaware that her species has an expiration date measured in decades. The 4-year-old male is playing with a collection of shells and pebbles, arranging them in patterns that seem to follow some internal logic. Is this proto-art? Evidence of symbolic thinking? Or just a child being a child, finding entertainment in simple objects? We'll never know. What we know is that he won't live to see his 20th birthday, that his potential will never be realized, that he represents the final generation of a 300,000-year-old lineage. Night falls over Gibraltar. The Neanderthal family settles in for sleep, bodies packed close together for warmth, the fire banked but not extinguished, guards set to watch for predators and other threats. They've survived another day. That's the victory. That's all they can hope for. 50 individuals. 49 after winter takes the oldest male to pneumonia. 46 after a hunting accident claims 3 of the prime-age males. 43 after 2 infants fail to survive their first year due to congenital defects from inbreeding. The numbers tick downward, inexorable as erosion. And then, one spring day approximately 20 years after our 12-hour snapshot, the sapiens come. The attack follows the familiar pattern: dawn assault, spears from beyond Neanderthal weapon range, systematic elimination of males first, then females, then children. The Neanderthals fight, they always fight, but they're outmatched in every dimension that matters. Their superior individual strength means nothing against coordinated tactics and superior weaponry. The matriarch dies defending her youngest son, her body shielding his until the sheer number of spear thrusts makes her position untenable. The 16-year-old male, now in his 30s, kills 2 sapiens before being brought down by a coordinated assault from 5 directions simultaneously. The daughters die quickly, efficiently, professional killers making short work of targets who've never stood a chance. The 4-year-old male, now 24, is one of the last to die. He's fled deep into the cave system, into passages so narrow that sapiens struggle to follow. But they do follow, with torches and patience and the absolute certainty that no one can be allowed to survive. They find him in a chamber where he's wedged himself into a crack, where he's made his last stand with nothing but a rock clutched in his massive hands. They kill him with spears thrust into the crack, unable to see their target, but patient enough to keep stabbing until the sounds stop and the blood stops flowing. His body will remain in that crack until archaeologists discover it 41,000 years later. The bones showing perimortem trauma consistent with multiple spear wounds. The crack itself impossible to access without modern equipment. The death position frozen in time, as testament to desperation and courage, and the futility of both against organized violence. The last Neanderthal dies in Gibraltar around 39,000 BC. Maybe it's this young male in the crack. Maybe it's an elderly female who outlives the massacre by a few weeks before succumbing to injuries or starvation. Maybe it's an infant, the very last one born, dying unaware that with its death, an entire species vanishes from Earth. We don't know the exact individual. We don't know the exact date, but we know the range, between 39,000 and 38,500 years ago, give or take a few centuries of dating uncertainty. And we know the location, this southern refuge, this last holdout, this place where 300,000 years of evolution came to an end. 12 hours after our Dordogne Valley massacre, 40,000 years BC, the end is still 1,000 years away, but it's coming, inevitable as sunrise. The pattern is set. The mechanisms are in place. The outcome is determined by forces far beyond any individual Neanderthal's ability to influence. They're already dead. They just don't know it yet. The cave goes silent. The fire that burned for generations goes out. The tools lie scattered where they fell, covered eventually by sediment and time, waiting for discovery. The bodies decompose, leaving only bones that will confuse and intrigue future scientists. So close to human, so clearly different. Speaking of a world where we weren't alone, where other human species walked the earth alongside us, until we killed them. All of them. Every last one. And then we inherited their world and convinced ourselves we'd won through superiority, through better adaptation, through anything other than the systematic application of organized violence over thousands of years. The limestone cliffs of Gibraltar stand eternal, indifferent to the tragedy that played out in their shadows. The Mediterranean continues its eternal rhythms, waves washing the beaches where Neanderthals once gathered shellfish, erasing all evidence of their presence. The wind blows through empty caves, creating sounds that might almost be voices if you listen with imagination and sorrow. But there are no voices. There are no Neanderthals. There's only silence and bones and the genetic fragments we carry, stolen inheritance from a murdered species. This is how it ends, not with a dramatic final battle or last heroic stand, just a slow fade to extinction, a shrinking population compressed into smaller and smaller refuges, finally eliminated in operations so routine that the perpetrators probably didn't even consider them noteworthy enough to preserve in their oral traditions. The last Neanderthal died knowing they were the last, in the sense that they experienced the isolation and the absence of others like them, but not knowing they were the last, the final representative of their entire species, the closing of a chapter that began 300,000 years ago, when their ancestors first emerged from earlier hominin populations. That knowledge, that tragic, final knowledge, is ours alone. We get to know what they couldn't. We get to see the full sweep of their rise and fall. We get to understand the extinction we caused. And we get to live with that knowledge, written in bones and genes, and the archaeological record of systematic violence. 12 hours after the first spear, the pattern continues. The genocide grinds on. The Neanderthals die, valley by valley, family by family, refuge by refuge, until there are none left to kill. And then we're alone. The only human species. The winners of a war that lasted 10,000 years. The survivors of a genocide we committed and then forgot. The inheritance of blood. Runtime, 8 to 9 minutes. 35,000 BC. 5,000 years after our Dordogne Valley massacre. The Neanderthals are gone. Not declining, not retreating, not clinging to final refuges. Gone. Extinct. Eliminated from every valley, every cave, every coastal enclave they once occupied. The last skeleton has already been buried by sediment. The last stone tool has already been dropped and forgotten. The last fire has already gone cold. Europe belongs entirely to sapiens now. What changes? Everything. And nothing. The sapiens populations that eliminated the Neanderthals don't pause to reflect on what they've done. They don't build monuments to their victims or hold ceremonies of reconciliation. They don't experience collective guilt or cultural trauma. They simply continue doing what they've always done, expanding, acquiring territory, competing with each other, refining their technologies, raising their children. But something subtle shifts in the archaeological record around this time. Something that tells us the Neanderthal elimination had consequences that went far beyond simply removing a competitor species. Sapiens' cultural evolution accelerates. Before Neanderthal extinction, sapiens' innovation happened at a certain pace, steady but not explosive. New tool types emerged every few thousand years. Artistic expression was present but limited. Social complexity was developing but constrained. After Neanderthal extinction, something changes. The rate of innovation increases dramatically. New technologies appear faster. Art becomes more sophisticated and widespread. Evidence of long-distance trade networks, specialized tools, complex social structures. All of this explodes in frequency and distribution. Why? Because the Neanderthals are no longer absorbing resources that sapiens need for expansion. Because the cognitive and cultural energy that went into systematic elimination can now be redirected toward other pursuits. Because once you've perfected the organizational structures and communication systems necessary for coordinated genocide, you can apply those same capabilities to other challenges. The skills that made sapiens successful at killing Neanderthals, abstract planning, coalition building, sophisticated communication, coordinated action across time and space, these are exactly the skills needed for cultural innovation and social complexity. The genocide was, in a perverse way, a training ground for civilization. Consider what was required to eliminate the Neanderthals. Long-term strategic thinking, planning operations months in advance, coordinating multiple groups across vast territories, maintaining cultural memory of techniques and tactics across generations, communicating complex tactical information, building alliances with groups you've never met, sustaining motivation for a campaign that spans centuries. Now consider what's required to build a civilization. Long-term strategic thinking, planning agricultural cycles and architectural projects, coordinating labor across large populations, maintaining cultural memory through oral tradition and eventually writing, communicating complex abstract concepts, building trade networks with distant groups, sustaining social cohesion across generations. Same capabilities, different applications. The genocide didn't just eliminate competitors. It selected for and refined the very traits that would eventually allow sapiens to develop agriculture, writing, cities, states, and all the complex structures we associate with civilization. We became civilized through the same processes that made us successful genocidaires. This is uncomfortable. This challenges our preferred narratives about human progress. We like to think civilization represents our better nature: cooperation, creativity, reason, compassion. We don't like to think it might share cognitive roots with our capacity for systematic violence. But the evidence suggests exactly this connection. Let's examine what happens to the sapiens populations in the generations immediately following Neanderthal extinction. The archaeological record from 35,000 to 30,000 BC shows several striking patterns. Population explosion. With Neanderthals gone, sapiens populations expand rapidly into territories that were previously contested or inaccessible. Sites multiply. Settlement density increases. The sheer number of sapiens living in Europe probably triples within 2,000 years of Neanderthal extinction. This isn't just natural population growth. This is the removal of a constraint. Neanderthals weren't just competitors, they were population limiters. Every valley they occupied was a valley sapiens couldn't fully exploit. Every hunting ground they controlled was territory denied to sapiens' expansion. Remove them, and suddenly there's room to grow. Technological diversification. The relatively homogeneous toolkits of earlier periods give way to increasing regional variation. Different sapiens groups develop specialized technologies optimized for local conditions. Harpoons for fishing, specialized projectile points for different prey, microliths for composite tools, grinding stones for processing plant materials more efficiently. Why the explosion in diversity? Partially because larger populations support more specialized knowledge transmission. Partially because without the constant pressure of Neanderthal conflict, there's time and cognitive space for experimentation. War is expensive, not just in casualties, but in attention and resources. Peace, even the peace of total victory through elimination, allows for cultural flowering. Artistic elaboration. The famous cave paintings of Lascaux and Altamira and Chauvet, these emerge or become dramatically more sophisticated in the period following Neanderthal extinction. Carved figurines, personal ornaments, musical instruments, all the archaeological signatures of symbolic thinking and aesthetic expression intensify. Again, this isn't coincidence. Art requires surplus. Surplus time, surplus calories, surplus cognitive bandwidth. The elimination of Neanderthals created that surplus by removing competition for resources and ending the need for constant military vigilance. But there's something darker here too. Some of the earliest sophisticated sapiens art depicts hunting scenes, successful kills, dominance over animals, and potentially over other humans. This is victory art, celebration of conquest, cultural processing of violence through aesthetic means. We see this pattern throughout human history. Triumphal monuments, victory columns, paintings celebrating military success, the Arc de Triomphe, Trajan's Column, the Bayeux Tapestry. War memorials of every civilization that's ever existed. Art commemorating violence, transforming killing into glory, making murder meaningful through aesthetic framing. It starts here, 35,000 years ago, in the caves of post-Neanderthal Europe. Sapiens populations that have just finished a 10,000-year genocide begin creating art that processes and celebrates their capacity for violence. Not all the art, of course. Much of it is about hunting, about animals, about the natural world and humanity's relationship to it. But enough of it contains themes of dominance and power that we can see the seeds of something that will recur across all subsequent human cultures. We make meaning through violence. We create identity through defining and defeating others. We build social cohesion through shared enemies and shared victories. The Neanderthals were our first shared enemy, our first other against which we defined ourselves, our first victims in what would become a long history of defining humanity by who we're willing to kill. 12 hours after our Dordogne Valley massacre, 40,000 BC, this process is well underway. 5,000 years later, it's complete. The Neanderthals are extinct, and sapiens have become the template for what humanity means. Not because we were the only human species that ever existed, but because we killed all the others. And yes, there were others beyond Neanderthals. Denisovans in Asia, Homo floresiensis in Indonesia, possibly other archaic populations we haven't identified yet. All gone by 10,000 BC. All disappearing in the wake of sapiens expansion. All following the same pattern we see with Neanderthals. Contact, conflict, extinction. We didn't share the Earth, we cleared it. Now let's fast forward. Let's trace the line from that first systematic genocide to the present day. Let's see how the pattern established 40,000 years ago repeats across human history. 10,000 BC, agriculture emerges. Farming populations begin expanding at the expense of hunter-gatherers. The expansion uses familiar mechanisms: superior organization, larger populations, coordinated violence. Hunter-gatherer populations retreat, are assimilated, or are eliminated. Over thousands of years, farming populations replace or absorb almost all hunter-gatherers globally. Same pattern, different victims. 3000 BC, the first states emerge in Mesopotamia and Egypt. State-level societies systematically expand at the expense of stateless peoples. More sophisticated organization, larger armies, bureaucratic coordination that allows for sustained campaigns. Non-state peoples are conquered, enslaved, or pushed to marginal territories. Same pattern, larger scale. 1000 BC, classical empires. Rome, Persia, China, Han expansion. Each empire expanding through systematic elimination or assimilation of barbarian peoples at their frontiers. Each using organizational advantages, standing armies, logistics, strategic planning, to overwhelm less organized opponents. Each creating cultural narratives that justify the expansion as civilizing missions, as bringing order to chaos, as anything other than what it actually is. Genocide by another name. 1500 AD, European colonization of the Americas. 90% population decline among indigenous peoples within 150 years of contact. Disease played a role, but so did systematic violence, deliberate starvation, forced labor, cultural destruction. The techniques are more sophisticated. Guns instead of spears, ships instead of walking, written orders instead of oral tradition. But the underlying logic is identical to what happened to Neanderthals. Remove indigenous population. Take their territory. Justify it through claims of superiority. 1900 AD. Industrial-scale genocide. Armenia. Holocaust. Cambodia. Rwanda. Bosnia. The mechanisms become horrifyingly efficient. Railroads for transport. Industrial poison for killing. Bureaucracy for organization. But strip away the technology, and you see the same fundamental process that killed the Neanderthals. Systematic, organized elimination of a defined other, carried out by people who've convinced themselves it's necessary, or justified, or even righteous. 2026 AD. We live in the shadow of this history. Every border on Earth was established through violence. Every modern nation-state emerged from processes that involved eliminating, displacing, or subordinating previous inhabitants. The entire structure of human political organization rests on a foundation of systematic violence going back to the Neanderthal extinction and beyond. This is the inheritance. This is what we carry forward from that morning in the Dordogne Valley 40,000 years ago. Not just genes, not just technology, but a template for how groups of humans relate to other groups. A pattern of expansion and elimination. A capacity for systematic violence dressed up in whatever justifications the era provides. Evolutionary competition, manifest destiny, racial superiority, religious mission, national security, humanitarian intervention. The language changes, the justifications evolve, the underlying process remains constant. And here's the truly disturbing question. Could it have been different? Was the elimination of Neanderthals inevitable? Was there a version of history where sapiens and Neanderthals coexist, where multiple human species share the planet, where diversity is maintained rather than destroyed? The optimist wants to say yes, wants to believe peaceful coexistence was possible, that the genocide was a choice rather than an inevitability, that we could have been better. The realist looks at the evidence and doubts. Every time sapiens encountered another human species, that species went extinct. Every time a technologically or organizationally superior human population encountered an inferior one, the inferior population was eliminated or absorbed. Every time, no exceptions. Across 40,000 years and every inhabited continent. That's not a series of unfortunate accidents. That's a pattern. That's what we are. That's what our species does when confronted with others who compete for the same resources. We don't share. We eliminate. This doesn't make us evil. Evil requires intent and moral awareness and choice. This is deeper than evil. This is our nature, shaped by 4 billion years of evolution that rewards successful competition and punishes failure with extinction. We're the descendants of winners, in a game that's been running since the first self-replicating molecules emerged in ancient oceans. Winning meant surviving. Surviving meant eliminating competitors. The ones who couldn't or wouldn't do this disappeared from the gene pool. We carry the DNA of survivors, of eliminators, of the populations that looked at Neanderthals and decided they had to die. But, and this is crucial, we also carry something new, something that emerged after the genocides, the capacity for moral reasoning that allows us to look at this history and judge it, to feel horror at what our ancestors did, to recognize that systematic violence, however evolutionarily successful, is not something to celebrate. This moral capacity is recent, very recent. For most of human history, nobody questioned the right to eliminate other groups. It was simply what successful peoples did. The innovation isn't the violence, that's ancient. The innovation is the recognition that maybe, possibly, we shouldn't do this anymore. That recognition is perhaps 500 years old in its earliest forms, maybe 300 years old in any widespread sense, maybe truly global and genuinely accepted only in the last 50 to 70 years, and even now incompletely and with constant backsliding. 500 years of moral evolution versus 4 million years of evolutionary programming that rewards violence. 70 years of genuine commitment to human rights versus 40,000 years of genocidal expansion. Which is stronger? We don't know yet. The experiment is ongoing. We're living through the test case. 12 hours after the first spear, the Neanderthals are dying. 40,000 years after the first spear, we're trying to build a world where such systematic violence is unacceptable. Trying to override 4 billion years of evolutionary programming with a few centuries of moral reasoning. It's not going well. Check the news. Check the border conflicts, the ethnic cleansings, the genocides that continue in the 21st century, despite our supposed moral progress. Check how quickly we revert to dehumanizing language about migrants, about other nations, about anyone we perceive as competition or threat. The Neanderthal genocide isn't ancient history. It's a pattern that keeps repeating because it's encoded in our cognitive architecture, in our social structures, in the very capabilities that make us human. We are the species that eliminated all other human species through systematic violence. That's not metaphor. That's not exaggeration. That's documented fact supported by archaeology, genetics, and the unbroken pattern of expansion and elimination that characterizes our species' entire existence. We inherited the earth through blood, through 10,000 years of coordinated killing, through perfecting the mechanisms of genocide until no other human species remained to compete with us. And then we built everything we call civilization on that foundation. Art and science and philosophy and law. All of it made possible by the organizational capacities we developed to kill Neanderthals more efficiently. All of it emerging from populations freed from competition because they'd eliminated their competitors. All of it resting on bones we've mostly forgotten about or chosen not to see. This is the truth we've been avoiding. This is what the Dordogne Valley massacre represents. Not an isolated incident, not an unfortunate accident, not even just the elimination of one species by another. It's the origin point of a pattern that defines us. The first genocide. The template for all that followed. The moment when the capabilities that make us capable of civilization were weaponized against other humans and proven devastatingly effective. 12 hours after the first spear, 9 Neanderthals are dead in a single valley. 5,000 years later, the entire species is extinct. 40,000 years later, we're still following the same pattern of expansion and elimination, just with better technology and more sophisticated justifications. The inheritance of blood continues. The genocide never really ended. It just changed targets and methods. We are what we've always been: systematic eliminators of competition, successful beyond measure, dominant across the globe, unchallenged by any other species, and still, somehow, still killing each other using the same organizational principles that killed the Neanderthals. Because the pattern, once established, doesn't end. It just repeats. The Reckoning. Runtime, 8 to 9 minutes. 42,000 years after the first spear flew in the Dordogne Valley, a team of archaeologists carefully excavates the same site. They work with brushes and dental picks, removing sediment grain by grain, documenting every fragment of bone, every stone tool, every trace of the violence that occurred here. They find the patriarch's skeleton. The 17 perimortem wounds are clearly visible in the bones. Cut marks on ribs, puncture damage to vertebrae, fracture patterns consistent with high-velocity projectile impact. They find the nursing mother with her infant, their skeletons intertwined in a final embrace that lasted 40,000 years. They find evidence of fire, of hasty abandonment, of a shelter that went from occupied to empty in a single day. The lead archaeologist, a woman who spent 20 years studying Neanderthal extinction, looks at the evidence and knows exactly what she's seeing. This isn't natural death. This isn't disease or accident or slow decline. This is massacre. This is murder. This is one small piece of a pattern that played out across an entire continent for thousands of years. She writes it up carefully. Peer-reviewed publication. Conservative language. Evidence consistent with interspecies conflict. Perimortem trauma suggesting violent encounter. Rapid site abandonment coincident with sapiens expansion. Scientific language that dances around the obvious conclusion, because saying it plainly, "This is genocide," invites controversy and pushback from colleagues who prefer sanitized narratives about human origins. But she knows, and increasingly, the scientific community knows. The evidence is too consistent, too widespread, too clear to interpret any other way. Sapiens didn't peacefully outcompete Neanderthals. We killed them, systematically, deliberately, effectively. This knowledge creates a problem. Not a scientific problem, the science is settled. A moral and philosophical problem. What does it mean that we're descended from genocidal colonizers? What does it say about human nature that our species' defining characteristic might be our capacity for systematic elimination of competitors? Some researchers argue it means nothing. Evolution doesn't have morality. Survival of the fittest is descriptive, not prescriptive. What happened 40,000 years ago has no bearing on who we are now or what we might become. We're not responsible for our ancestors' actions. We can acknowledge the violence without letting it define us. Other researchers argue it means everything. That the capacities which made us successful at eliminating Neanderthals are the same capacities that shape human behavior today. That ignoring this history means we're doomed to repeat it. That understanding our genocidal origins is crucial for building a future where such violence is no longer inevitable. Who's right? Both. Neither. The question itself may be flawed. Let's approach this differently. Let's ask, if Neanderthals could speak to us across 40,000 years of silence, what would they say? They can't, of course. They're gone. Their voices are lost. Their perspective is irretrievable. But we can imagine. We can try to see through their eyes, to understand their experience, to give them the voice we took from them when we took their lives. Imagine you're the patriarch in the Dordogne Valley. You've lived 45 years in a world that makes sense. Harsh, yes. Dangerous, certainly. But comprehensible. You hunt. You gather. You protect your family. You pass knowledge to your children. You maintain the fire that connects you to generations past and future. You exist within cycles, seasons, births, deaths, that repeat with comforting predictability. And then the strangers come, tall, thin, fast, speaking in sounds you don't understand, carrying weapons that kill from distances you can't match, moving in coordinated groups larger than anything you've seen, operating on principles you can't grasp because your mind doesn't naturally extend to that level of abstract planning and organization. At first, they're rare, occasional encounters. Mostly you avoid each other. Sometimes there's conflict, but it's containable, individual, comprehensible within the framework of normal territorial disputes. But then they keep coming. More of them, closer, pushing into valleys your people have occupied for generations, taking hunting grounds, claiming water sources. And when you resist, when you defend what's yours, they kill you. Not in fair fights. They don't fight fair. They strike from ambush, from beyond retaliation range, in coordinated assaults that overwhelm individual courage and strength. You retreat. You move to less desirable territories. You hope they'll be satisfied, that they'll stop, that there's enough land for everyone. But they don't stop. They never stop. They keep expanding, keep pushing, keep killing. Every year, more of them, fewer of you. Every season brings news of another family gone, another valley lost, another refuge penetrated. And you don't understand why. You've done nothing to them. You're not their enemies. You're just trying to survive, to raise your children, to continue the existence your species has maintained for hundreds of thousands of years. But they see you as obstacles, as competitors, as things to be removed. In your final moments, as the spears rain down and you make your last stand knowing it's futile, what do you think? Rage at the injustice? Sorrow for your dying family? Incomprehension at how the world could become this? All of it, probably. A chaos of emotion and sensation, and the fading awareness that everything you are, everything your people are, is ending. And your last thought, if you have one, might be something like, why? Why us? What did we do to deserve this? The answer, across 40,000 years? Nothing. You did nothing wrong. You simply had the misfortune to exist in the same time and place as a species more capable of organized violence than your own. That's all. No moral failing, no evolutionary inadequacy beyond the specific dimension of coordinated killing. Just bad luck. Wrong place, wrong time, wrong competitors. This is what the Neanderthals might say if they could speak. We didn't deserve this. We were people too. We loved our children. We cared for our injured. We buried our dead. We made art and music and tools. We had cultures and traditions and knowledge passed through generations. We were human in every way that matters. and you killed us anyway. Not because we were evil or inferior or threatening, but because we were in your way. Because you could. Because the same capacities that make you capable of science and art and philosophy make you capable of systematic elimination of anyone you define as other. You are not better than us. You're just better at killing in groups. That's the only advantage that mattered. That's the only reason we're gone and you remain. And if we could warn you about anything, it would be this. The capacity that killed us hasn't gone away. It's still there, still active, still shaping your behavior. You've turned it on each other now that we're gone. Nation against nation, ethnicity against ethnicity, ideology against ideology. The same pattern, just new targets. You'll keep doing this until you either destroy yourselves or fundamentally change what you are. And changing what you are means confronting what you've always been. Means recognizing that your greatest achievements and your worst atrocities flow from the same source. Means accepting that you're not the heroes of your own story. You're the survivors of a genocide you committed, trying to build something meaningful on a foundation of bones. This imagined Neanderthal testimony is harsh, but is it unfair? Look at the evidence. Not just archaeological, but contemporary. How do modern humans treat other groups we perceive as competitors or threats? How quickly do we dehumanize? How easily do we justify violence? How readily do we convince ourselves that our expansion, our needs, our security require the elimination or subordination of others? The pattern holds. 40,000 years later, we are still doing variations on what we did to Neanderthals, still expanding at others' expense, still organizing violence with terrifying efficiency, still creating cultural narratives that justify what we want to do anyway. The technology changes, the scale varies, but the fundamental logic, us versus them, zero-sum competition, systematic elimination, remains constant. So what do we do with this knowledge? How do we live with the understanding that we're descended from genocidal colonizers and that the traits which made them successful are our inheritance? Option 1. Denial. Reject the evidence. Insist the Neanderthal extinction was natural, peaceful, anything other than systematic violence. Maintain comfortable narratives about human progress and cooperation. This is psychologically easier, but intellectually dishonest and practically dangerous, because it prevents us from recognizing and addressing the patterns we keep repeating. Option 2. Nihilism. Accept that we're violent by nature, that genocide is inevitable, that trying to build a more peaceful world is futile because we're fighting 4 billion years of evolution. This is intellectually consistent but morally bankrupt, and becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If we believe we can't change, we won't even try. Option 3. Tragic awareness. Acknowledge what we are, a species capable of both transcendent beauty and systematic horror, carrying capacities for cooperation and violence in the same cognitive architecture. Accept that the same minds that can imagine utopia can implement genocide. And then, with that awareness, consciously choose to build systems and cultures that constrain our violent capacities while nurturing our cooperative ones. This third option is hard. It requires holding two contradictory truths simultaneously. We're capable of terrible violence, and we're capable of choosing not to enact it. It requires constant vigilance because the violent patterns are deeply encoded and easily triggered. It requires building institutions specifically designed to prevent the kinds of systematic elimination we're naturally good at. International law, human rights frameworks, democratic checks on power, cultural values that emphasize universal human dignity, educational systems that teach history honestly, including the ugly parts. All of this represents humanity's attempt to build guardrails against our own worst tendencies. Are these guardrails working? Partially, imperfectly. The 20th century saw industrial-scale genocides that killed tens of millions. The 21st century continues to see ethnic cleansing, forced displacement, systematic violence against defined others. The pattern hasn't ended. But there's also unprecedented global consensus that genocide is wrong. International institutions dedicated to preventing it. Widespread moral recognition that systematic elimination of groups is unacceptable. This is new, very new. Fragile, easily undermined, but real. We're in a race between our ancient capacities for violence and our recent moral evolution. Between the programming that killed Neanderthals and the conscious choice to be something different. Between 4 million years of selection for competitive success and a few hundred years of trying to build cooperative frameworks that transcend competition. The outcome isn't determined. We could succeed. We could build a global civilization that genuinely constrains systematic violence, that protects diversity, that doesn't require eliminating others to make space for ourselves. The fact that we've never done this before doesn't mean it's impossible. Or we could fail. We could continue following the ancient pattern, just with nuclear weapons and climate change and technologies that make the stakes existential rather than merely genocidal. We could eliminate ourselves the way we eliminated Neanderthals, through superior organization turned toward violence, through zero-sum thinking, through inability to recognize shared humanity across perceived differences. 12 hours after the first spear, the Neanderthals were doomed, but didn't know it. 42,000 years later, we might be in the same position, doomed by our own nature, unable to see the pattern clearly enough to break it. Or maybe not. Maybe the fact that we can study the Neanderthal genocide, can feel horror at it, can recognize it as genocide rather than inevitable competition, maybe that's evidence of genuine moral evolution. Maybe consciousness of the pattern is the first step toward breaking it. The Neanderthals couldn't study their own extinction. They experienced it without understanding it, died without comprehending why, disappeared without leaving testimony. We have the advantage they lacked. We can see what we've done. We can trace the pattern from 40,000 years ago to the present. We can recognize ourselves in both perpetrators and victims. That recognition is painful. It's easier to maintain comfortable narratives about human exceptionalism, about progress, about how we're fundamentally different from our violent ancestors. But those comfortable narratives are lies that prevent growth. The truth is harder and more hopeful. We're exactly what our ancestors were, capable of systematic violence, shaped by millions of years of competitive evolution, carrying the same cognitive architecture that killed Neanderthals. And we have the capacity to recognize this about ourselves, to be horrified by it, to consciously choose different paths. Both things are true. We're genocidal colonizers, and we're beings capable of moral reasoning about genocide. We're the species that eliminated all other human species, and we're the species trying to build a world where such elimination is unthinkable. We're the problem and the potential solution. The Dordogne Valley is quiet now. Tourist attraction, archaeological site, place where people come to look at cave paintings and imagine prehistoric life. Very few of them know about the massacre that happened here. Very few understand that the rock shelter they're standing in front of was the site of a family's violent death 40,000 years ago. Maybe that should change. Maybe we should mark these places, not with monuments celebrating sapiens' victory, but with memorials acknowledging Neanderthal loss. Not to wallow in guilt, but to remember, to recognize, to ensure that the first genocide isn't forgotten just because it happened to a different species. We build Holocaust memorials. We preserve sites of historical atrocities. We create museums dedicated to remembering violence so we don't repeat it. Why not do the same for the Neanderthals? Why not acknowledge that our species' first great crime was eliminating our closest relatives through systematic violence? Not because we need to feel guilty about something our ancestors did 40,000 years ago, but because remembering forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about what we are and what we're capable of. Because the pattern that killed Neanderthals is still active. Because forgetting is dangerous, when the thing we're forgetting is our own capacity for genocide. 12 hours after the first spear, 9 Neanderthals died in the Dordogne Valley. 42,000 years later, we excavate their bones and try to understand what happened. 42,000 years after that, year 84,000 AD, if we survive that long, what will future archaeologists say about us? Will they excavate the ruins of our civilization and marvel at our achievements? Or will they catalog our extinction and wonder how a species capable of such sophistication could destroy itself through the same violent patterns that brought it to dominance? The answer isn't written yet. We're still in the process of determining it. Every choice we make about how to organize societies, how to resolve conflicts, how to treat those we define as other, these are choices that either continue the pattern or begin to break it. The Neanderthals can't speak, but their bones testify. Their extinction warns. Their genetic fragments within us remind us that we carry both perpetrator and victim, both killer and killed, both the capacity for horror and the capacity to recognize horror. What we do with that knowledge is up to us. The first genocide happened 40,000 years ago. The pattern it established continues. Whether it ends or whether it consumes us, that's the question our species faces. The Neanderthals didn't have a choice. They were eliminated before they understood what was happening. We have a choice. We can see the pattern. We can study the evidence. We can understand our own nature clearly enough to make conscious decisions about what we want to become. The question is whether we'll make those choices before the pattern repeats one final time, with us as the victims instead of the perpetrators. 12 hours after the first spear, the future was determined for the Neanderthals. For us, the future is still open. But the window is closing. The pattern is strong. The ancient programming is powerful. And every day we delay confronting what we are, we make it more likely that we'll follow our cousins into extinction, eliminated not by another species, but by our own inability to transcend the violence that made us dominant. The Dordogne Valley remembers. The bones testify. The genetics confirm. The pattern warns. The first 12 hours of genocide happened 40,000 years ago. The last 12 hours of humanity might be happening now. Unless we choose differently. Unless we break the pattern. Unless we finally become something other than what we've always been. Systematic eliminators of competition, successful beyond measure, dominant across the globe, and completely unable to stop killing each other using the same organizational principles that killed the Neanderthals. The choice is ours. The Neanderthals can't help us. They're gone. We killed them all. The sun sets over the Dordogne Valley. The same sun that rose on the morning of the massacre 40,000 years ago. The same valley where a family died and a pattern was established. The same earth that absorbed their blood and preserved their bones and kept the secret until we were ready to discover it. The tourists leave. The archaeologists pack up their tools. The site grows quiet. And in that silence, if you listen carefully, if you allow yourself to hear what the evidence is saying, you can almost hear them. Not voices exactly, but presence, testimony, warning. We were here. We lived. We loved. We died. You killed us. Don't pretend you didn't. Don't forget what you are. And for your own sake, if not for ours, please, please try to be something different before it's too late.